How you feeling, Roy? How you doing?
Hey, Coach, how are you?
Okay. How you doing?
Quarantining, that's what I'm doing.
No, I know. But geez, you go 2 freaking years, and you can't even.
And the crazy thing is Mike and I don't see each other, and we get it within a week of each other. It's like we never left each other, Coach.
Yeah, really, man. It's like, uh, I'll tell you, the multicultural event rocked the house.
Was it great?
Oh man, you'd be so proud. I'm glad I was able to go. I hadn't been out of the house a lot, during this thing, but felt that one needed. And wow, I'm going to share something with you and Tom. Uh, and It's pretty cool. I got a call from the state board of ed, and they want us to do a presentation on our work
Really?
at the state board. Yeah.
Are they thinking like a real holistic or something specific and targeted that
Well,
stands out?
I I'll I just got the message from one of the members. He reached out, and so I'll connect with him. I've got an idea of a script, and that's just how my it kicks in really quick. But anyways, I was thinking, just so you know, I would introduce our work, our body of work. Going back to 2015 quickly. Because I can do it. Yep, it started with a cartoon.
Right?
And that cartoon flipped the town out.
It started the work.
And that's what kicked it. So anyways, I can do a quick synopsis of that, and then I would introduce uh, Tom, and then he would introduce you and Maggie, um, and depending on what they give us for time, you guys can take it, you know our page, probably bring even in a link, depending on like how the meeting's structured, where you guys can show our page, because the page tells a lot. I've been referring to people all over the country, actually, have been linking onto our page, and they're going like, wow, man, so, and it's because I'm proud of the work you guys are doing. I mean, it's easy to, it's like, you know taking a championship trophy or a championship jack and say, yeah, we're Hurricanes, man, we rock. Don't be messing with the Canes, man.
Well, we'll make it work, whatever it is, Coach.
I know you. But it was weird because I almost missed it, because it was just like a sentence. Coach, we're reaching out. I was asked by the chair to give you a call. And I'm going like, whew, I'm glad I didn't miss that one.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a great opportunity for us. You know, they've been doing different presentations on the subject, from different districts, but I figured, we'll give them the hurricane flavor. You know, but as soon as I get word from Patrick, with a little more detail, I'll make sure to, cue you and Tom up and Maggie. I think it's June 15th. That's the meeting they're proposing. It's a Wednesday morning meeting. They usually meet Wednesdays.
Well, school will be out by then.
Hey. Yeah. Well, I guess we probably should get this show on the road. So we ready for this? Come on there. Who's our CATV person there? Hey, Tom. Tom. Can you hear me okay? It froze up there. You know, we had the abatement hearing, here yesterday, and it was a little chunky, but at least it was only one person, thank goodness. One family. Hey, Tom. Wonder he's looking. It's like they haven't turned the audio on in the room or something.
I can hear you, Coach. I
Yeah,
don't know if
yeah.
they can.
Yeah. I don't think he can, because he's not really acknowledging our discussion.
Yes, I'm glad to see that you're speaking.
There we go.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm doing
There
well.
we go.
Seem to be
We have
feeling
about
better.
5 people.
Yes,
from the
yes,
community,
much,
right?
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. So Tom,
Hi, everybody.
can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We're live now. We're live.
Okay. All right. Because there was a void there for a moment.
Yeah. We have a couple attendees. We're not going to promote them yet, but
Yep. Yeah, we'll address it on time.
I reckon.
Tom,
I'll keep my eye out for Hava or anyone who does need to be promoted.
right, thanks. Thanks.
Well, I think he's probably going to start. He's probably going to start without her.
Because we have people in the community that have come, as well as other folks. So I think 6:07, we'll call the Hartford Board of School Directors Community Engagement Meeting. Whoops, to order. Yeah, there's our agenda.
Yeah, I'll stop the share for now.
Okay. It was a surprise. You go like, okay.
Sorry, Coach.
No, it's Zoom world is interesting, but that being said, welcome everyone to our May 24th community engagement meeting. Really excited about the agenda today, especially one of our members presenting her capstone project, but that'll be introduced in a moment. That being said, are there any changes, additions, and approval of the agenda?
No changes, Coach. Or
Fan,
Again,
fan,
move that we approve the agenda as presented. Oh, okay.
No, you got it.
I'll get it next time.
so we have a motion and multiple seconds. Uh, that being said, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. I'd like, Tom, if he would, to introduce the special presentation, if he would.
Sure. Well, it's my pleasure every year to have a few students present their capstone projects from the honors program at the high school. And this year it's really exciting because one of the student representatives to the school board is also in the honors program and is sharing her presentation tonight on increasing transgender inclusion at Hartford High School. And we're just so proud of what Olivia's been able to do. And we're also proud that she's confident enough to present tonight to the board and the public.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. I'm gonna share my screen and pull her presentation up if that's okay.
You're starting. Fantastic. Guess I'm starting tonight.
We weren't sure there were, so.
Seems like my sharing ability, oh, no, there it is. Disappeared for a second. 1 second.
Do you need some tech help?
Mhm.
I
told you.
That could be your second
I told you I'm not-
Capstone part 2, helping Mr. Ballsy find the share button.
Yeah. No, I've got the share button. It's just, I've got multiple billions of things going on my computer.
I mentioned that I was only tonight.
Ah,
Right.
there we go.
It's coming.
There we go.
No.
Press slideshow.
Whoop.
Other side. No, other side of this of the screen, Mr. Ballsy, on the right. Put the more.
Gallery, where?
No, there you go. Close. Nope.
Almost there, almost there.
Sorry about that. I haven't used that in a while.
I know. Yeah.
See, usually Roy's here, doing the techno stuff for us.
Let the young folks deal with the.
Well, they've spoiled me.
Yeah, really. That's what I mean,
Yeah, they just take such good care of me. I just kind of voila, comes up.
Well, with the technical struggles out of the way, I can start my presentation. Hi,
Yes.
I'm Olivia Merrill. Like Mr. DeBalzi said, I am an honor student as well as the student representative to the school board. And so my capstone was focusing on increasing transgender inclusion, specifically trying to use policy analysis as a means of doing that. You can go on to the next slide. Before I go into the policy analysis and all of that, I would like to provide some background. Anywhere from about 2 to 10% of American high schoolers are transgender, and that is according to 2020 YRBS and 2021 analysis of surveys from Pittsburgh public school students. And while we oftentimes think about adolescence as a time when people are questioning their gender identity, children as young as kindergarten can express that they too are transgender or gender nonconforming. Both of these terms, transgender and gender nonconforming, are umbrella terms, and they encompass many other identities, for example, being non-binary. But one thing that remains consistent and the same across all of these different identities is a feeling of true self not matching someone's external body or the way that society views them. Transitioning is a process that looks different for every single person. For some, this will include changing their name. For most, it involves changing their pronouns. And misidentification, lack of social supports, bigotry, restrictive laws, and dysphoria, that feeling of internal self not matching external self, all deeply negatively impact the mental health of transgender and gender nonconforming people. Go on to the next slide. Thank you. According to a 2020 report titled Suicidality in Transgender Youth, 56% of transgender youth reported a previous suicide attempt, and 86% reported suicidality. Go on to the
Yeah,
The
it takes
next
a
slide?
minute. I'm
Okay.
sorry. That's not my fault.
It's all right. According to a 2015 study, a study in Ontario, Canada, social support, reduced transphobia, and having any personal identification documents changed to an appropriate sex designation were associated with a large and absolute decrease in suicide risk. Next slide. The Trevor Project also reports something similar. While it's loading, that usage of chosen name resulted in a 29% decrease in suicidal ideation and a 56% decrease in suicidal behavior. Literally, things as simple as asking for and using a student's preferred name and pronouns could potentially save that student's life. And this is where my capstone really comes into it. My capstone, which is titled Increasing Transgender Inclusion at Hartford High School, was broken down into 3 targets, all involving policy analysis. The first was identifying practice and use. The second was comparing our policy to other existing policy. And the third was comparing our policy to the ideal policy based on the recommendations of advocacy groups, clinicians, as well as transgender people and other advocates too. Next slide. Gotta love the suspense, Mr. DeBalsey. To identify practice and use, I made a survey and I sent it out to the faculty and staff of Hartford High School. It was sent out in April of 2021 to every single person who works inside the Hartford High School building. And it included 18 questions about practice and use, knowledge of policy, as well as things like attitudes and actions, and other things like that in regards to teachers and administrators interacting with transgender or gender nonconforming students. And here I have a breakdown of some of the more interesting responses that I gathered from this survey. I had asked, did you ask your students for their pronouns at the start of semester 1? This was the start of semester 1 of the 2020-2021 school year last year, and 55.6% of respondents said that they did not ask for their students' pronouns. This was again consistent when it came to asking about semester 2, with the graph on the next slide, saying that still 55.6% of people were not asking their students for their pronouns. Next slide. Given these responses, it sort of makes sense that when I'm asking about the comfort level of people and how much they would rate their disagreement or agreement with these statements, there is an immediate increase in reported discomfort with questions about asking a student for their pronouns. Faculty and staff are reporting that they are comfortable asking a student for a preferred name, but much less comfortable asking a student for their preferred pronouns. And you can see the purple color for strongly disagree is showing up on that question, as well as I'm comfortable using the term non-binary. I am comfortable using the term genderqueer, and I am comfortable correcting others when they misgender a student. Go to the next slide. Thank you. Respondents of the survey also indicated limited policy awareness. I had asked the question, what does Hartford High School's policy say with respect to bathroom and locker room use? While the Hartford School District policy allows students to use bathrooms or locker rooms that correspond with that student's gender identity, only 25% of respondents indicated awareness that that was the case. That blue 25% cutout on the pie chart there is showing the percent of respondents who responded with the correct answer to that question. Thank you. From there, I moved on to more of my direct policy analysis. And directly from the survey and also my experiences in the high school, as well as the experiences of my peers, I was able to compile instances where the policy is not understood, not followed, or simply too vague. One example of this is when the policy is stating that school staff will respect any request to use a name or pronoun that corresponds to a student's gender identity that the student asserts or wishes to assert at school. And while this is what the policy is saying, there is no district-wide guidance on how to request a pronoun or name change. There is also no mention of timeliness when it comes to this, and peers have expressed to me frustration in the past when it comes to the months to years-long wait that it has taken them to be able to change their name or their email address at school. The policy also states that sorry.
Not ready?
Not quite ready yet.
Sorry. Just trying to be prepared.
The Hartford School District policy also states that a transgender student will not be required to use a locker room or restroom that conflicts with that student's gender identity. However, in Hartford High School, there are only 3 gender-neutral bathroom stalls, all of which are on the first floor, and there are no gender-neutral locker rooms. Now ready for the next slide. Thank you. Many aspects of this policy also remain out of date, and there are several instances where state policy has changed, but the Hartford School District policy has not yet changed to reflect these updates. One of the clearest examples of that is in regards to school activities. Our policy does not say anything in regards to athletics or other activities like that. However, the VPA has issued a statement saying that students can participate in all VPA activities in a manner consistent with their gender identity, and that includes athletics. Thank you. And one aspect that became very, very clear as I was doing analysis based on the recommendations of other policy groups and advocacy groups and things like that was how the needs of the transgender community are truly so diverse. Like I mentioned previously, children as young as kindergarten can express a need to transition. And this is why advocacy groups have recommended the use of a student transition plan, which would essentially operate like a 504 plan. Go back one slide, Mr. Balsey. Thank you. This would be like a 504 style transition support plan in which a student would be able to voice their opinions, say what they are looking to do, have everything written down in a single consolidated document, and then be able to revise this in the future as the student's needs change. This idea was something that I had shared with Dr. Slamman, district clinician, in a meeting that we had had previously. And he wholeheartedly supported the implementation of something like this, as well as the writing of new policy to support the use of something like this. Examples of student transition support plans have been made by organizations such as the GLSEN, and either copying something similar to that or making our own policy and our own student support plan template would both have the same effect of being able to get students involved and formally write down what a student is looking to do in a single formal way that has both accountability on the part of the student as well as the school district and the teachers. Next slide. This was not directly part of the policy analysis, but still something that I did in my capstone. After getting the results back from my survey, I could clearly see that a lot of staff members at Hartford High School were not aware of policy and very, very uncomfortable when it came to having conversations with students and what to best do to support their students who are transgender or gender nonconforming. So with Dr. Brzezowski and also Ms. Ibrahim, I was given the opportunity to speak at a faculty education meeting on October 5th in 2021. And the purpose of this meeting was to provide faculty and staff with some more information about gender identity, as also discussing student needs and student supports, identifying resources that we have in the building, and increasing confidence in discussions about gender identity. And that involved both sharing vocabulary as well as discussing common microaggressions. So things like switching to less gendered language when possible, and other things like that that a teacher, administrator, staff member can do to make our school a safer and more inclusive space.
Always slower because of a lot of words. Slide.
Yeah. But the
There it
result of this faculty meeting was that more people at Hartford High School and people in our district in general became aware of the needs of students, and also finding places to include discussions about pronoun usage and asking their students for pronouns in the future. One of the other things that came out of this meeting was this email from Mr. Fogg saying that he'll be working to determine what can be done in Infinite Campus to ensure that students can use their preferred name, as well as looking for things like the star login information or places like that that can be altered to either include a student's preferred name or no name at all, making it a safer and less harmful school activity. And I am very, very hopeful about this because one of the side effects that we have seen recently was that the guidance department, while working with Mr. Fogg and Mr. Yates, were able to publish a policy and support plan to allow students to be able to change their name across Infinite Campus. However, while I presented my capstone on May 17th, I had several students in the audience and I asked how many of them were hearing this for the first time, that they had the power to change their name in Infinite Campus. Over half of them raised their hands, indicating that they had previously not been aware of this until I was sharing this information. This information was first shared in a faculty meeting in April, and by May 17th, when I was presenting, over half of the students just about in attendance were not aware of this, which again indicates that while we have come a long way, there is still so much that needs to be done, especially when it comes to informing teachers and empowering teachers to share information.
Slower.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak and to share my capstone. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, Olivia, I know it's not really part of your capstone, but do you think there has been an improvement in the school district?
I can't speak for the school district as a whole.
Okay, the high school,
But-
yes.
I can see that there are lots of reminders of how bad things used to be. So for example, we now have 2 gender neutral bathroom stalls this year that are now accessible to students. And there is a small 8 by 11-ish size sign pointing to those in the high school. Previously, that was not information that any students were aware of. But still, guidance counselors are not publicizing that information when they're doing tours. And we can still see that there are only gender neutral bathrooms on the first floor, none on the second floor, meaning that a student is still going to be inconvenienced and have to go out of their way to be able to use a bathroom that they feel safest in.
Any other questions for Miss Olivia?
This is not directed at Olivia, but I would like to ensure the next time we have a report on EL 10, that some of the concerns that were addressed in Olivia's presentation are reported upon as a mechanism to ensure we're fixing what's wrong.
Being that it's covered in our inclusivity, that would be a good topic area to do it.
One question. Can I ask a
Yeah.
question? Coach, I have a question.
Sure.
Mary. Olivia, I'm just curious, were you able to get any, or does the Vermont YRBS look at gender identity as part of that survey?
There are questions from like YRBSs in the past
Yeah.
that do ask questions such as, do you identify as transgender? And so, like I had mentioned previously, transgender being sort of an umbrella term, and also matching up in a lot of ways to other identities. There are lots of people who might answer no to that question while still being gender nonconforming.
Okay.
And so while it is a direct question able to give us data that I am able to look at and share with you all, it is still very much not a complete picture.
So there's some work that could really be done on that particular assessment.
Definitely, as well as making sure that students feel safe enough to report their identity accurately, because there still is a culture of a lot of bigotry and worry about safety when sharing information about yourself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia.
I don't have a question, but I do want to commend you. That was very informative, a great capstone
Thank you.
to be done for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I too would share that excitement and thanks. And your timing is impeccable as far as the area of interest and some of the data that you shared. And I'll be sure to make sure that when the session restarts, that we get in touch with you for some of your research that you've done as we continue to work through legislation to help change that dynamic in schools.
Coach, can I just have a couple comments?
Yes, please, of course.
First of all, I just want to thank you, Olivia, for such a thorough report. And I actually really appreciate all the feedback because I am completely committed to fixing all the issues you identified. I mean, I do think, and I am proud of the progress we've made, but obviously it's not enough. And I don't want to make excuses, so I'm not even going to try. But you know, we have some work to do. We have some facility work to do to address the issues you brought up. We have some administrative work to do. We've done some. None of it's been easy. I think one of the, and this is an excuse, but one of the issues we always contend with, especially in the high school, is the legalities of keeping legal records that have to be you know, saved for years. And so it's not an easy thing to say, okay, we're going to change the kid's name in the file, but not in the cumulative file, or not the transcript, or not on the transcript. It gets a little bit tricky. So that's been sort of hard for us to navigate, but I think we have it down now with the help of our attorney. But needless to say, we have a lot of room for improvement and growth, and I think the policy committee's got a little bit of work to do too.
That particular conversation's been taking place.
Maybe over the dinner table.
It's already started, I see. I wasn't invited to that, but I can imagine. But yeah, I'm thinking, and before you graduate, it'd be really nice if I could go over, you know, my notes with you to make sure that I haven't missed something, or, you know, you get the bulleted list of these are the things that really need to be addressed. Be great. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being willing to present, preparing that whole
Thank you.
slideshow. Great. Good luck and congratulations on your upcoming graduation.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Very exciting.
And as we move into our community engagement portion, of the of the meeting, I think that Russ is right on point, as far as utilizing our existing broader policy as a reporting mechanism for that. It's interesting. There was a bill that was introduced at the beginning of the session, so it would have been 2 years ago, that looked at these issues, and it was sitting in House Education. And you noticed I said it was sitting in House Education, which means it did not move. So what that says is we collectively, as a state and as the adults and hopefully more youth involved in this process, will spur change. And I'll just kind of make that general statement.
Coach, sorry to interrupt, but I think your mic might be too close, or somehow we're getting a lot of staticky.
Really?
Yeah, it sounds much better.
Okay.
Perfect. Sorry, sometimes
Let me bend
I
that.
have to say that to people.
Let me bend that critter
Yeah,
away.
in our Zoom world.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for adjusting that.
But I think that there's some of the best work we've done this year has been youth centered and actually youth involved. So kudos to both of our youth members on our board. And I think I can speak for the board that we are so proud of both of you, for what you bring to this conversation. So Russ, would you
Before we go on, Coach,
yes.
one comment. Well, it clearly needs to be updated. The fact that we have a policy at all is largely due to Paul King. So giving credit where credit is due, I think is important.
Cool. And that's accurate for sure. I remember that coming to light. So thanks for that
Yeah.
that point.
That was a long time ago too.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah. So it was 2015.
Hmm.
Yeehaw. Jeez. Time flies, But that being said, so Russ, community engagement.
Okay, so yeah, basically, I will turn the session over to Dr. Mary Gannon, who's going to continue the fine work on equity and diversity that we started several months ago. I don't exactly remember. I remember the training and it was good. I just can't tell you when it was. So, and I mean, she's an expert in the field, recognized nationwide in this issue. So we'll let the expert speak.
Thanks, Russell. Can you all hear?
Yeah.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Gonna share my screen.
Superintendent's gonna share the screen, and I'll just let you
See if
know.
I'm a little better at it this time.
While you are bringing that up, again, just, I always think that one of the parts of my professional life that I should have pursued and didn't was working with and being a high school teacher. So I always think like that is where my heart is, and really want to just appreciate, your voices and
Thank
also
you.
acknowledge that the courage that it takes sometimes to bring forward the issues and the conversations that are not always popular in your school community or in the community at large. And so I just want to honor that. And tonight's theme, as I thought about our last two, Russell, I wish it was a couple months, but I looked back, it was March 2021, and then I think it was
Wow.
October 2021, maybe. But I was thinking about what would be most useful and where are we in our conversation about continuing this work of equity and anti-racism in Hartford. So I did bring in this idea of courage tonight, having the courageous conversations. So before I launch, I just wanted to also,
Why this is so slow, sorry.
well, that's okay.
I've got it in present mode, but some
Oh.
reason there's a long delay between me and the screen.
Well, and I also have not updated to Google Slides, though my teenager is telling me that I should be doing that. So I'm on PowerPoint still. So sorry, Tom, you have to switch between
No, it's okay.
different applications. I just wanted to set a little bit of a tone for tonight. Because I think what's always important when we begin to have the, when we engage in these conversations, and I know that for this group particularly, as I know most of you here, and folks who are with us streaming, this is not a new conversation for you, but there's a really significant current socio-political and cultural backdrop for what we are engaging in tonight. And one of the things that I've been talking a lot about in the last week since the, I would say the racial massacre in Buffalo, New York, is how do we break the silence around these conversations around race and equity and white supremacy culture? And I've been listening to a lot of interesting podcasts this week with academics and also pastors from the Buffalo area, but from other parts of the country who are really asking those of us who identify as white or those of us with different spheres of influence and positions of leadership, think about ways that we can be stepping up and really breaking the silence that we know is what keeps white supremacy culture in place. So that will be something that I'll reference tonight, but I just, again, as part of my own personal journey, as somebody who is a white person involved in this work personally and professionally, I think it is important to keep naming the things that have been happening in our country. And we could talk about 600 years ago, we could talk about last weekend, and unfortunately today, there was another shooting at an elementary school in Texas. I'm not sure if folks have heard about this yet. So I am thinking a lot about the ways that violence is also alive and well in our society, and then how violence also gets racialized, and that's a different conversation. But I just felt like it was important for you all to know what's on my heart tonight and what some of the backdrop is as we continue this conversation here. What I would also like to start with is some really good news, which Coach kind of brought into the room earlier before we went on, that there's some amazing efforts that have been taking place in the school district in the last year. And I've had the good fortune of continuing to work with the school district, with the administrative team, and also with Maggie Ibrahim, the equity coordinator. And I don't know if she's listening, and I didn't tell her I was going to do a shout out to her. So she's probably going to kill me when I see her this week. But I just feel like it's really important to always keep uplifting the good things that are happening. And I wasn't able to attend the multicultural community event on Sunday, but I heard it was, she sent me like 25 photographs. It looked amazing. And those kinds of events and those kinds of opportunities, I think, are also part of disrupting white silence and disrupting some of the white supremacy culture that we know, we're all breathing that air. So I just wanted to shout out to her and shout out to Tom and all the folks that were involved in supporting that effort. And, I know there's a lot of other things that have been happening. There's been some great efforts around parent groups and student groups. And I'm sure you all get a report from Maggie, so I won't go on, but I am just honored to be engaged with this school district and with this community, because there is, on the part of many people, including students and faculty and admin, et cetera, really trying to walk the walk. And it's not perfect, and there's still a lot to do, but I know that in my work across the state, that folks are talking about Hartford, and Coach and I've, also talked about this in some of the different contexts that we're in. So, again, I always think it's important to kind of uplift, also recognizing that we have a lot of work to continue to do around school culture and climate. And clearly your analysis, Olivia, reminds us of that. So what I wanted to also bring to you is, all right, we go to the next slide. I'm going to start us with the land acknowledgement because I sort of jumped ahead a little bit. And those of you who have been in our sessions before, when I've been facilitating, know that we have been intentional about putting forward an Indigenous people's land acknowledgement. And this is something that the state, across the state in my work, I've been learning about that, about the value of that and why it is important. It was certainly something that was relatively new for me in the last couple of years in my work. But it's really important as a powerful way of showing respect and honoring Indigenous communities and peoples on the land of which we work. So Olivia, would you do us the honor of reading that?
Sure. We acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Abenaki people on which we live and thrive today. We recognize and honor that they have lived, worked, and continue to reside on this land. We are grateful to be here and to be sharing of this land, and for the sharing of this land.
Thank you. So I think acknowledgements are important in all the different parts of the work that we do, and particularly I think resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories in the state and across northern New England is part of what is important when we do land acknowledgements. So I have been learning that myself along the way. So I want to share a little bit of inspiration before we get started. I have been reading some of the poetry of Amanda Gorman. If folks aren't familiar with Amanda, was the first youth poet laureate and also spoke at the Biden-Harris, delivered a poem at the Biden-Harris inauguration. And I was thinking about how to bring some light into this conversation today when there is a lot of heaviness. So Sydney, do you mind reading this? I'm sorry, I'm putting my teacher hat on and calling out students. But
No worries. There is always light if only we are brave enough to see it. If only we are brave enough to be it. Hopefully I said that right.
So again, I think Amanda Gorman and the energy around her poetry, but also her work and bringing young youth voices into the room, but really calling us to task and talking to us about bravery and courage. And so thank you for bringing that into the space. Go to the next one, Tom. Thanks. You all know, again, for those of you who have worked with me, that part of what I like to do and thinking about how we set tone, how we, I think of you all as part of a learning community. And even the folks who are out there on cable, but those of you who come to this and spend 2 hours at the community engagement session have made a decision to really be part of this learning community. And that really means that it's a process and it's a journey. And what I like to offer is ways to think about how we build that learning community, because we all need different things in order to participate. We all come into this conversation at different levels of understanding, lived experience, depending on where we're situated in terms of race or gender or class, or whether a Vermonter or a Bostonian like me. So there's lots of different ways that we enter, and I think these are important. So who can read this for me? Actually, I can read it because I've got it here on my screen. So
I can't move the pictures of those online.
That's okay.
Not in my control.
I have it on my screen. So, and I cannot take credit for this pledge. This was something that was given to me from my good friend and comrade Stefan Gillum, who is president of the Windham County NAACP. He and I do a lot of work together, and we were thinking about how to bring forward a pledge instead of a set of guidelines, just because we were making it a little bit more interesting. So as we begin to discuss difficult topics such as race, class, privilege, and oppression, we all pledge to grant each other as much grace, empathy, and understanding as possible. We recognize that we are all on an individual and collective journey to dismantle and eventually erase oppression and white supremacy systems from our culture and institutions and communities. So we pledge to be kind and respectful to each other, even when we disagree with one another. We pledge to refrain judgment and instead seek more understanding. And we pledge to hold one another accountable and move together to hold each other as best we can. So I also just want to say to you all that that the folks who are here tonight and the school board, and Kim from the select board, thank you for being here, are really also here setting this tone. You're saying to the community that we really care about how the culture and community feels for all people who live here, and that you are committed to that work. So I think this is, again, part of the pledge is also setting a tone and an understanding of that this is something that we all care about, and we will do our best to bring our best selves to that. Okay. So just for tonight, I have a couple of goals that, goals are always lofty because there's so much to do. And so I've been narrowing my goals down to 3 and down to 2 instead of 3. What I'm going to have us do tonight is deepen our understanding, kind of dig into a little bit more of how we understand our own individual identities, which I'll talk more about in a moment, and also our lived experiences of having the experience of oppression, marginalization, or having the experience of privilege, and to think about how those experiences impact the roles that we all bring to this. So superintendents, select boards, school boards, students, folks who are out there in the virtual world, thinking about what is the impact of who you are in terms of your identities and your own lived experiences on the roles that you play in the community and the work towards equity and anti-racism. So that will make probably more sense when we begin an exercise, but we're going to be spending a little bit of time examining our own selves in relationship to the work that we do. I also think tonight is an opportunity to keep exploring what the challenges are of having these conversations. We know they're difficult. I think we are living in a country right now that's struggling with a lot of divisiveness and challenge around difficult conversations on a number of different issues. And I want to support the community in building some skill sets and how you are doing that work here together as colleagues. So we'll spend, I think that all that we're doing tonight is really helping to build that muscle, that skill set around how you are engaging with this. And sort of recognizing that there are multiple perspectives, identities that people bring to this conversation tonight. And so we'll wrestle with some of that. Okay, thanks. Good. Oh, sorry, you knew that. So I wanted to share this with you all. Some of you may be familiar with Elena Aguilar's, I don't think I ever say her last name right, but that's close. Pretty good, right?
Yeah.
She is an academic instructional coach. She has a couple of different texts out. I think Maggie Ibrahim introduced me to her text, Coaching for Equity, which is a fabulous book for faculty and staff in schools. And I wanted to just bring the ideas of educational equity. I think there's all different ways that people define what educational equity is, but I was appreciating how she's talking about this here, because one of the things that I think we need to be covering when we talk about these ideas of equity is how all students benefit. A lot of times when I work in schools or in school districts, particularly in predominantly white places, a lot of times folks are wondering why we have to have this conversation if the folks who are experiencing the most marginalization are not a significant part of the population. And so I say, well, this is good for everyone, right? Like when we talk about equity, when we talk about a multicultural curriculum, when we talk about telling this true story of the history of this country, whatever it might be, that it works for all students and all students benefit and all students need it in order to move out into the world that is being created for them. So I will just read this quickly. The true indicator of equity is revealed in the impact that a teacher in school have on students and what students gain from being in that classroom in school, which includes skills, abilities, knowledge, thoughts, feelings, a sense of belonging, and a sense of potential. And one of the components of this that I really like is she talks a lot about this sense of belonging. What does it mean to feel that you actually belong in, if we're talking about schools, like in your school district, in your school community? And I would say that's true, not just for students, But I think it's important to broaden that to staff, faculty, bus drivers, people who are serving the food, like across the board. Do people feel like they have a sense of belonging? And what are some of the challenges that are getting in the way of that? So I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there's any questions, comments.
I particularly liked your comment about how this is benefiting everybody. The analogy I usually use in my mind is the American with Disabilities Act, which was
Yes.
intended to help those who were handicapped have access to basically American life.
Yes.
And it was intended to help people who had wheelchairs and otherwise mobility issues and other things like that. But it turned out that once they went to the trouble of putting wheelchair access ramps in on sidewalks and so forth, and made doors easier to open and so forth, it improved a lot of mothers with children who were trying
Yes.
to deal with their baby carriages. It improved a lot of elderly people who had a hard time just figuring out how to open a door. It improved a lot of everybody,
Like ramps.
the ramps
So
and so
true.
forth. And so when we do things that make life easier and better and fairer for the most disadvantaged among us, we are not just doing it only for that population. We're doing it for all of ourselves.
Thank you for that, Peter. It's such an important point because I think a lot of the narrative that's in schools right now in public education is that we're only serving a particular group of students. You know, so for example, I think one of the things that's happening in northern New England as we see Afghan refugee families moving into communities and we see resources getting moved to those children, into those families, there's a sense somehow that it's taking away from others who are not going to get what they need. I would also say that it is important for us to recognize, and I've been saying this in some places where I am, that, you know, when this is happening in Brattleboro, where we have many refugee resettlement families coming in and folks are getting jobs, they're getting some access to basic needs. And there's a lot of Black and brown community members who are also saying, that's not something that has been easily accessible to me. So it is interesting for us to understand, like, what does it mean when we welcome and talk about a community where everyone belongs, but then we have to really drill down to who has not felt that way. And many folks, I think, still in the state who have been here for 600 years, may feel that that's not the case. So there's a lot of complexity, and I think we have to pay attention to that. And Peter, I just want to say to you, that's usually the example that I give, because as a mom who spent a lot of time strolling that baby around because she didn't sleep, I was so grateful in my community when they started, I don't know what they're called, but you know, when they made the sidewalks accessible, when there was like a dip so you could move across the curbs. And so it's a great example of that. And I would also say that if we were to talk about it, the ideas of how equity is good for everyone is that it does not just because our kids are building relationships across race or across difference, or they're getting particular kinds of curriculum. I think it's just good for communities to benefit economically and also just in terms of the access to resources and the exchange of ideas and cross-cultural learning that can happen. So that's, I think, given that we are in predominantly white communities, that's a narrative that a lot of us have been trying to bring forward, is that we're not just doing this to benefit kids who come from marginalized communities, but we're doing this for everyone. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? All right. So we're going to skip the next one because, just because I always have way too much. So you can go to, oh goodness, is that as big as it's going to get? Oh no. Oh, good.
There it is. Jeez, you scared me for a second.
I didn't bring any flip chart paper, so I would be in trouble.
Yeah.
So I'm going to shift us, it's 5 to 7, yes. I'm going to shift us right into this exercise, and I'm sort of rethinking how to do this, so just work with me here for a moment since we have a few less
We do
people.
have a couple people online that, you know, select board members, Ally. And
Oh, great.
I did see Mike here before. I don't know if he's still here.
Okay, great. Welcome, Joe. So we're going to launch into this exercise and we'll see what happens. But let's stay on the wheel. Can we stay on the wheel for a second?
Oh, yes, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
So I said earlier that one of the things that I wanted to bring to you tonight as one of the goals is to give you an opportunity to really think about where we are all situated in these conversations about equity and anti-racism, so that we're not just talking about something out there, because a lot of people love to do that, you know, diversity is out there and racism is out there. But let's think about ourselves in the context of all the different roles that we play in this community. So we're going to spend a little bit of time with what I call the social identity pie, though my daughter told me it's not a pie, Mom, it's a tire, it's a bike wheel. So I said, yes, 18-year-old, you are right about everything. So what I'll draw your attention to is a couple things. So here we are, we as humans are in the center of this bicycle wheel, right? So there we are, the self is in the center. And if you look at the tire rim on the outside, so where you see, I stand up there. If you see some of the different institutions and contexts on the tire, right, on the rubber tire wheel on the outside. So things like, for example, political climate, economy, history, community, religion, geography, institutions, culture, and family. Those are just, it's not a complete list, but it should just give you an idea of all of these larger social institutions and social contexts that exist out there in the world that are impacting all of us. Sometimes we're not even aware of that. And the self is still in the middle. The spokes of the wheel are the different ways that we, and again, this is not a complete list, that we as human beings may define certain aspects of our identity. So specifically, things such as religion or spiritual identity is another way they like to describe that, or aspiritual, ethnicity, race, of course, political affiliation, age, sexual identity, chosen interests, nationality, social class, which could also be socioeconomic status, personal histories, economic status, gender, and health disabilities, but we could also just talk about the, kind of larger social group of disabilities. So this is just, again, to give you an idea of that, if you think about who you are just as a human being, that all of us have different specific affiliations or identities within those different social groups. Or maybe we don't. Maybe we don't even identify with a political affiliation, right? For a range of different reasons. So that's just to give you a little bit of a sense of what your profile could potentially look like. What I would like you to do, and again, this is not a complete list, so I want you to, again, feel free to add on what will be most helpful for you as we go to the next slide. And I'm not that savvy with the PowerPoint. So can we go to the next one, Tom, and then we'll go back to the wheel. Because what I'm going to ask you to do is to choose two identities or two, and it could be any of those spokes on that wheel, or it could be others that are missing for you. So for example, I always think of linguistic identity or language is something that for some people is really salient, like really means something to them. And so that's something that people could choose as an example of one that's not there. But I'm asking you to choose two that you're most aware of in your role in the community. And then what you'll do is, if we can figure this out, I'm hoping we can pair folks up. I don't know how we'll do this on the screen, but I'm going to ask you to talk with your partner about what you chose and why you chose it. And how do you feel about each of those identities that you chose? So just sharing as much as you feel comfortable about those particular aspects. Then the second question, which I think, again, kind of increases our risk level here a little bit, but begins to get us thinking about how we are situated because of those larger social institutions that were on the tire wheel, where a lot of the ways that privilege is structured or not having access to resources is structured is because of these systems. So the second prompt is, where does privilege show up in your identities? And to maybe talk with your partner about what you're thinking about as you acknowledge and sort of wrestle with privilege in those identities, if it's something that's relevant. Okay. And then when we come back, what we'll talk about is the impact. How do these identities impact you as a member of this community and in your role as a community leader, of course, as school board members, select board, parents, whoever else is part of our conversation tonight, but begin to think about how they impact you. And then the second part of that, which we'll move into collectively with school board, is how does privilege show up in the work of crafting policy and supporting an equity and anti-racism framework in the district? Very big question. I'll unpack that more. But I think what will be interesting to notice is that oftentimes for those of us who have privilege, we're not always even aware of how it's functioning and operating in the work that we do. And so we'll be examining what that means for you in the work of running the school district and being in the community. How does that sound? Okay, so I don't know how we'll do this with folks, maybe just folks who are online can chat with each other, maybe. I don't know what the capacity is.
I
Okay.
can't create a chat room in the
Yeah.
version that we use for the CAT.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it.
Is there any way to enlarge that? I'm afraid my eyes are bad enough. I can't read it.
Squinting like crazy.
That's one of my
Gosh.
identities, age.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know. Can you do
Yeah, I
that?
don't think I can.
Definitely chalk that one up to a privilege for us.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
it's part of the slideshow. I could share it with you so you could have it on your device in front of you.
Would you like me to switch seats with either one of you? Since I can see across the room and you can't.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody
Ooh,
needs,
wow.
if anybody needs eyes, they can come over here.
So again, you're just choosing two that you're most, choose two that you're most aware of. And maybe what we can do just because of our setup is instead of pairing off, we'll just come back and talk as a large group and share out and see what people come up with.
Sounds good.
Okay, good.
All right, Olivia, I'm
Great.
gonna
Yeah,
just
I can get out of your way.
Thank you, because I can't see there.
Yeah, can you do it down the
Don't you
bottom,
like that?
Tom, where it's either on the right-hand
Oh,
side,
that's much better.
way in the corner where it says 75%?
Yeah.
Two.
Green.
The identities now, we're not taking our thoughts about the impact of the.
You could, thank you. You can do that, Kim. Thank you for that. Yes, I mean, you can start to talk about that because we'll come back and talk about it as a large group. Sure. Okay.
We don't know.
Oh, yeah, why not? Seems fun.
I'd be happy to switch seats.
Mary, we're gonna
Are you
choose
sure?
two that
Yep, so
we
you get
identify with it.
choose two that
Affects
you are,
us in our community.
that you're most aware of
Okay,
in your role in the
in the
community.
community. Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, it might be, tomorrow might be, you might choose two different ones, but ones that you're thinking about today. And then what did you choose and why, and how did you feel? So we'll put that slide back up so then we can just come back and have a conversation. And like I said, this is not a complete bicycle wheel. So if there's things that are missing for you, please feel free to identify those.
Quick question,
Yes, Sydney.
chosen interest, is that basically like hobbies per se, or what do you mean
Yeah.
by chosen interest?
I know, it's, yes, I think it could, yes, absolutely. It could be things that you choose, that you have an interest in versus things that might be assigned or assumed about you.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarifying that.
Yeah.
Which is again, not necessarily a social group, a social identity group, but it does kind of give information about sometimes where privilege can reside, because people have access to certain abilities to choose certain things, right? It's been a little, it's slow, isn't it? Well, there
It
we go.
sure is.
Can you go to the questions now? Peter, do you still need that?
I think I've got it well enough that I can
Okay.
sort
I
of
know.
play the game.
Okay, good.
And
We'll help.
everybody given the pledge at the beginning will be nice to me.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Well, I didn't take it.
We pledged to refrain from judgment. Yes, we did pledge that.
Very slow on that.
Yeah. I appreciate you doing it.
Started over.
And I can read them to folks. So then you're thinking about what you chose and why, any particular reactions or feelings you have about any of those identities, and where does privilege show up in your, oh, here we go. We're going way back.
Yeah,
Oh, where does
I
privilege
started
show up?
over,
That's okay.
sorry,
We show up in your
just-
identities.
There it is.
Okay.
I tried to enlarge it, it just made it go crazy.
Yeah.
You want to be in the questions?
Please.
This one, right?
That's it. Great. Yes. Looks like Russell's still thinking, so I'm going to give you.
No, I can-
Okay, good. So before we talk about this, one of the things I again, just to think about how to keep connecting the conversation that we're having tonight to the work of the board and how you're moving forward with EL10, with the race and equity policy. And also I did print up, which I hadn't looked at this in a while since Curtis and I put some of this together, was the pages from the recommendations from the strategic plan. So I'm just wanting to support you in thinking about how are you making some of the connections to your understanding of this work and where you're situated in it, in terms of all these different identities that we're talking about and your role. And also recognizing that sometimes there's challenges to moving some of this forward because of these different parts of who we are, because of our own lived experiences, because of a lack of language for it or a lack of understanding. So it's important, I think, as we are working in the community, to be honest about that and to engage in a conversation, which sometimes can be uncomfortable because we're wrestling with this sort of, in some ways, building the plane as we're flying it. And I don't know, that's always a good idea, but sometimes that's just where we are. And the other thing I would say, just again, to contextualize this exercise a little bit, is recognizing, as I said this earlier, that we all come from very different lived experiences and points of understanding in these conversations. I always think of that as can be really interesting and beautiful. Like it can bring a lot of complexity and interest in how we understand each other. And it can also be challenging, right? So the idea of looking at your identities a little bit is to kind of think about who am I in the context of privilege and identity? And are there ways that I'm not even aware of how that informs how I work as a school board member or I work as a community leader? So would someone like to start us off?
I can start.
Ah, there we go.
Great.
One of the first things that I'm very aware of tonight is the special interest category. I'm here because I am a student rep, but that comes from having a dad who's on the school board my entire life, like growing up with discussions about policy at the dinner table, and that most people haven't had that experience. I'm also very into sciences. I have my first published research paper, things like that, but it takes money to be able to do that. I'm here because I don't need to be working. My family can afford to have 2 people spending a couple hours every week associated with the school board and not working some other job or something like that. And that's a real area of privilege for me. But also to like working through like being a young person in the school board, I have a lot of people looking out for me, but also too, I sort of don't belong in many ways.
Olivia, can I ask a follow-up to that?
Yeah.
So when you say not belonging in terms of like in this here or in the school or?
I mean, I oftentimes like bite off more than I can chew. Mr. DeBalsey knows this. And like I just sort of get myself involved in things that like aren't what a high school student usually does. And so I am sort of making my own way as I go along in those areas, not really knowing what to do. Sometimes figuring out that something's a mistake once I make it. That sort of stuff.
I'm going to kind of bounce off what Olivia is talking about relating to chosen interests, mainly because, I mean, as the other student representative, I also have a bunch of interests that I participate in, or like I know my peers, they're in different like areas of participation in the school, like with certain clubs or with athletics or in the music department. And I can say myself, I'm a part of the music department, athletic department, and then, well, I'm here. And so it's kind of nice to have a different perspective on everything, especially as a student athlete and musician, and then also someone on the school board, because I feel like I have an opinion about all of the above. And I feel like it definitely widens my perspective on a ton of different things or aspects that go on in the school or like around the community. Yeah.
Can I ask each of you a follow-up? Because I appreciate getting the youth perspective. And I also appreciate, Olivia, how you were talking about like a place where you see you have privilege, like you were born into the resources, et cetera, but then also talking about your identity as a young person or as a youth and what that means when you are trying to engage in spaces where youth voice is not always welcomed or is not respected or revered. And so I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about what allows you, let's see, what's the question? The question is, what has allowed you to be able to come forward and do that as young people? I think it'd be interesting for adults to hear that. Like, what has allowed you to do that?
Learning how to sir and ma'am.
I was not expecting that, but okay, go ahead.
Being able to figure out who's in charge, being nice to that person, because like being able to find yourself a mentor and like latch onto someone makes it a lot easier. So for adult people, like making yourself very accessible, like putting yourself out there to students, that's really, really helpful. I've had to do a lot sort of like get over the anxiety of talking to like big scary adults who do powerful things. So putting yourself out there, being willing to talk, being nice people who are like open, that makes everything a whole lot easier.
Sydney, any thoughts on that?
For my perspective, I've always kind of what Olivia said, just having a mentor. I mean, I've always been able to talk with adults or my elders of like my opinions. I've had that anxiety before and that fear, like they're the bigger person, like I don't really have a say, yada yada yada. But it's also helped me grow as a person, as well as being a mentor for somebody else, having that voice and being able to have that communication ability is partially like trying to think of a word, not cool necessarily, but it's kind of helpful and it's pretty interesting. And so, yeah. That's all I can say.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful. I was just curious. Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead. Go ahead.
I just have to comment on this.
Yes.
'Cause I am, I'm so impressed that these young people can speak up and are confident to speak up. And it's something that I just cherish, because growing up in my era, young people either lacked the confidence or were not allowed to speak up. Adults knew better. The elders always knew better. They knew more. They didn't really want to hear the student voice as much. And that's kind of just the way it was. And we were sort of, at least in my, neighborhood, my community, not allowed. So having the position that I'm in and having students who want to speak up, I really encourage. So I've always encouraged that when students come forward, I want to, do everything I can to support them. Even if it's something that I think might be not so much negative, but contrary or a criticism of the school system. It's, we're here for the kids. And we want to do right by you and make it better and improve things. Obviously, within reason, we're here to educate you. So we can't play all day out on the football field or have dances all day or something. But it's listening to the students is critical. And there's so many, bright young people nowadays, and we have to hear what they need to say. And they've made so many improvements, and the contributions just of Sydney and Olivia, and several more at the school have been incredible. Student at the middle school too, there's been a huge expansion of student voice and embracing that. And the principal scores very high when we do surveys on student voice. And sometimes that's not so popular with some of the adults.
Yeah, that can be hard. I think there's a lot. I mean, I think of ageism, the experiences that young people often have about the assumptions, the stereotypes, the limitations we place on young people based on age. So it's real. I mean, those things are real. They live in our society. And I think in schools, it's really powerful when adults can try and think outside the box a little bit. Because I've been socialized as a mom of an 18-year-old who's very much in charge of her reality of her life. As I've said, that I have to think about like how I am meeting her as a young person and not feeling like I have to, kind of control, or I have whatever my assumptions are that are operating, and I need to disrupt those. And I also love what you said, Sydney, about how you could be a mentor.
Yeah.
I think it's very powerful that you can because I think there's a lot of young people who want to do what you both are doing, and for a lot of different reasons don't feel like they are able to do that.
Another, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Another additional piece of, or like why I think it's powerful or whatever to me is because, I mean, I've always been involved with politics. My family, when we used to before we moved to Vermont, my dad was always involved with politics and I would always go to the town meetings, not by choice. And I would always hear perspectives of all these adults, never a high schooler or a child, basically to share their interest or to share what's going on in the community from a student perspective, considering that's what they would bring up half the time is the education system. And being here now, representing my peers in some form of way alongside the school board is pretty meaningful to me because I am able to share my voice as not a lot of people in my past or currently are able to do so. And it makes me feel like I'm doing something good for myself and others that I know, as well as for the future.
Yeah.
And it makes me feel pretty happy and comfortable knowing that I'm doing something that is going to improve upon the future of the Hartford community as well as a whole. So
Great, brilliant, thank you. And as you are thinking with Mr. DeBalzi and with others around who might be coming in to take Olivia's spot, I would really encourage you to think about the voices that are not always heard in the student population and how to uplift some of those voices so that, because I think it is true. I mean, when you come from families where that's supported, that it's easy to enter in, right? But sometimes that's not the case for students who come from different family structures or lived experiences. So,
and that's why really it's so important to me that the adults in the school system support student voice.
yes.
Because not everybody has Olivia's parents, who honestly have done such a wonderful job. And you know, Russ or Nancy's children or Sydney's parents who have encouraged her to speak up and be confident and helped her shape and guide her to do so appropriately and have what she says heard, because you know it's powerful and it's honed and refined. Not everybody has that. So we, as adults in the school, we've got to support kids in how they present themselves and help them, you know, shape them so they are heard. It's like a blink of an eye, and you'll see with your daughter. We see with Olivia and Sydney that it's over in a minute, it feels like. And all of a sudden they're in the adult world and they're talking and they're speaking up and they're running for office and they're doing these great things, and you're like, all of us had a part of that. So that's the really powerful part of what we do as educators and what we do as adults with kids. Try to, you know, encourage them and help them be confident to speak up and do so in a way that people want to listen and they're heard, because you are the future. So,
Thank you both for
it's awesome.
sharing all that. So now we're going to hear from the adults. Go
Uh-oh.
ahead, Russell.
I'll go first. I mean, one of the biggest ones I thought of was age. And I mean, that came to my mind because I just had a milestone birthday, so age is on my mind, but I think the other, a multiple of. It's like twice 30, let's just say. But I also represent somebody who grew up in New England, and diversity where I grew up consisted of maybe 5 people. That was it. And I also I had privilege because my father was a high school principal and everybody knew who he was. So by extension, I got away with a lot of stuff that a lot of people would not have in different circumstances, just because they knew who I was and, oh, he's a good kid type thing. And that's also because I'm also part of the demographic that causes some of the problems, and the one we need to reach the most, old white guys. And I think about that because I'm fortunate enough to have 3 daughters who call me on things, because there's terms of speech I've used all my life without thought, that when they called me on it, I said, oh, shucks, or a derivative thereof, and realized that it was how offensive potentially it was. And I just sort of used it I heard it. I mean, it was used a lot in watching sports.
Yeah.
Type thing. So you heard it and it was just matter of fact, spoken without anything. And I mean, let's face it, I'm a big baseball fan, and some of the controversy about naming teams, I never really thought about, and how that could really be perceived negatively by particular demographics type thing. So I think a lot about how we reach people like me.
Great.
And the other thing that troubles me is there's a lot of good people who really haven't thought about some of these things and may be good people, but don't realize their privilege, the things they're doing, and how they can be perceived type thing. So that's where the patience comes in type thing.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Russell. Can you expand a little bit? So when you think about that, because it's pretty powerful what you're talking about and having some of the recognition of that versus folks who just don't for whatever reason. Can you talk a little bit about how that insight for you shapes your work on the school board?
I think it's one of the reasons I'm so committed to some of the work here. And I also, and I haven't been recently, but one of the committees that I'm on, because I try to think about, because I'm on the H. Corey committee, and I don't necessarily have the shared experiences, but I do know that it's the people like me who are the ones who need to be brought, for lack of a better word, into the fold.
Yes.
And I mean, especially people who've grown up in New England, because let's face it, New England is not representative in terms of diversity of this country type thing. I mean.
Yep. Great. Thank you for that. And I would also say, just again, to challenge all of us to keep expanding on this idea of diversity, right? So for sure, like I grew up in Boston in the late 60s and 70s. I had a foster brother who was Black. I was living in a really white Irish Catholic community during race riots. And it was a really difficult time understanding the racial politics of, because I was having a very different experience, right? But I was also aware of diversity within class because of where I lived. I was aware of diversity in terms of religion because we had one section of the neighborhood that was the Protestants, we had Catholics over here. So I think that also is a richness of diversity that exists in New England that we don't always talk about because we're focusing so much on, and this country does that. When we talk about diversity, we talk about race. So I think we all bring, like in this room, if you had a room like we have right now, there's a lot of diversity in here, even though we present a lot of us, most of us, as white. Within those contexts of our own white identities, we have difference. So, but thank you for that. I appreciate that. Someone else want to share?
Oh, sure. You got to go last.
Thanks, Nancy.
So speaking of age, so when I looked at up there, I chose age the very first thing, and then I said, no, I want to go with chosen interest and economic status. Being much older than what Mr. Russell is, I mean, Mr. North over here is. No, Russell North over here. So I grew up in an era that women had not even come close to that glass ceiling. We were, when I was a senior in high school, you had two choices. You either went to college or you got married and had children and stayed home and took care of the kids. I was raised in the South. Big difference. And so, and I was raised in a dirt poor family, and I have 3 other siblings. And when I was the oldest, and when it got time for me to graduate from high school, the comment was, well, where are you going to move? I still got 3 kids to feed and take care of here. I don't have any way to get you to college. My mother nor my father have college educations. They didn't. We lived out in the country. I rode 25 miles into school and 25 miles back home every day. So there wasn't a lot of educational opportunities even presented to me. And we didn't, in that time and era, didn't have a number of counselors in our schools to be able to help you to get to there. I had friends that went to college at that point too. And I was always very envious of them. You get to go to college. Oh my God, that's so exciting. You know, my car was, my father paid $50 for it. He says it's sound. You have to pay the insurance and you keep all the upkeep and da 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 da. And it was a 47 Army Green Studebaker. So if you don't know what that looks like, look it up. I used to park two blocks from school and walk the rest of the way in my senior year. We didn't have a lot of people of color of any kind around us. The town that we went to school in, there was a high school for the white kids. And I'm not saying this to be mean or ugly, but this is how it was presented to us. All right, if you're white, you go to this school, no matter where you live. If you are brown, you go to this school. And if you are black, you go to this school. And we never did anything together as a school. My mother and my grandparents were extremely religious, so I was brought up in a good Southern Baptist home. You don't drink as a Southern Baptist, you don't dance as a Southern Baptist, there's a whole lot of don'ts. So once I got away from home, and Wayne and I got married, and he was in the Air Force, so we traveled all the time. And now all of a sudden, we're making friends with people that are Oriental, or people from Portugal, or people from South America. And Wayne was in the military for over 20 years, and the longest we ever stayed anywhere was 14 months. So we did a lot of traveling. And I got to meet a lot of different people and get to understand where they were coming from compared to where I had come from. And then once we started having children, you never knew who was going to be in your house or not. You were taking care of kids and then as I got up here, and let me back up a little bit. So I was in Richmond, Virginia. Now I'm supposed to not say this, so y'all don't hear me. This was the good old boys regime down there at the time that I lived there. So, and Rotary International had just in the early 80s said it was okay for women to join Rotary. And I owned a 4-star Italian restaurant at that time. And I was asked to be their first female member. And I was ecstatic, because I'd heard all the stuff that they do, and I'd go to some of their events as a participant. And I just thought, oh, this is something I like this. This is taking care of other people. This is serving other people that's in your community and outside your community. So I really wanted to do that. I did that. I went to work for a commercial printing company in the 90s, and it was a very, very old company in DC, and I was their first female sales rep. And this was in the 90s. And I'm just thinking, when I'm sitting back and thinking, when my grandchildren who are in this school district sit back and say, well, what did you do? And you did what? And then we talk about the other things that I did, which were at that point trying the women, the females, were coming into our own, and we could do things, and people were hiring us and training us and teaching us that my mom never had that opportunity. And it dawned on me. So when I moved up here, some of those chosen interests just stayed with me, which I think is one of the reasons I wanted to run for the school board. I'm a past district governor of our Rotary. Hartford Community Coalition, Take Bite Out of Hunger. All of the programs that I'm involved in up here, my chosen interests are to serve other people. And that comes from the past experiences of economic status.
Mm.
I was the oldest of 4 children and I wore hand-me-downs from my cousins. So that all still is in my mind when I'm trying to work with families that don't have as much as they need. They don't have enough to eat. Their kids are obviously having problems, not only emotionally, but at home. I don't know how many kids have come through my house, not only up here, but down in Virginia. When we lived down there, we had a couple of teenage boys that one's parents had gotten killed in an automobile accident and had been sent to a family that they were 20-year-old kids, themselves. And my son came to me and said, "Hey, can Joe Blow here come and live with us?" Sure, bring him on. So I think I've always had that interest, but when I look back at the interest of being able to help and to serve, I still kind of go towards those that need extra help. And that's still my passion. And I think that, as Coach has reminded me that many times, that a lot of times I bring a different perspective into the school board. So sometimes I'm sure that's good, and sometimes I'm sure that might not be good. But I still I'm a champion of the ones that need it the most. And that's not saying that the kids like Olivia, who does have more privilege, don't need that help too.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
There are kids out there, and we've seen them come through our school system the same way. They're crying for help the best way they know how to ask for that help, and some don't make it. And as Russell just went through a meeting before this one, talking about the kids and stuff in the area and what's going on with them. So
Thanks,
does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, fascinating.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's a couple things. I'm
I'll
gonna
sit
move
back.
it. No, it's fascinating. I think it's I don't know how much you all have a chance as colleagues to kind of hear, your past experiences and your lived experiences and things that inform now. So I want to say a couple things. One is, I think it is really powerful when you have had a particular experience of not having what you needed. I'm just, as a young person, and how that still informs and shapes how you think about how you serve or who you're engaged with, et cetera. So I appreciate that. I think it's true for all of us, like where we're situated, our socialization, growing up as a Bostonian. I still talk about myself as a Bostonian, but now I live in New Hampshire, but I still think of that because it was so profound for me.
Sure.
And it was very formative. We all have those formative stories, right? The other piece that I would say to you is when you were talking about, this idea of equity, and I think we hear a lot of this sometimes from parents or from the gifted student community, right? Where we have these gifted students and people are saying, well, we're sort of leaving them behind because so much energy goes into the special education budget. I'm sure as school board members, you've heard some kind of narrative similar to this. And so what I always have to remind people is we're not talking about equality. We're talking about equity. So it's not that those kids are getting more than the kids who don't really need that. We're trying to even the playing field. Right. So I think, again, that's really the narrative that we want out there, so that we are disrupting the divisiveness that's in public education right now about who's getting more than others. And so I just appreciate how you were sort of making that distinction. Other folks that want to share.
Yes, by default, I'm the last one left.
I don't know. Well, we might have some of our select board guests that might want to, but.
And I certainly don't want to step in their way, but at the same time, This is an interesting one for me. I have a hard time sort of choosing which spoke to start climbing up and down on. I could start with the fact that my youngest sister and my brother are both Black, and we grew up in Texas in the 70s. I could start with the fact that I have a learning disability. To this day, I still can't spell, and if it wasn't for the invention of the spell checker, I wouldn't be employable. But I think what I'll talk about, since we're really talking about privilege, is the privilege of education. I come from a very interesting family. My grandfather grew up in an Irish family where the girls went to college and the boys stayed on the farm because the girls were going to become teachers. My grandfather ran away from home, and during the Great Depression, paid his way and his family's way, and by selling Encyclopedia Britannicas, and got himself an education, and got himself into law school, and got himself into a white shoe law firm in Boston. But at the same time, I come from a family where my grandmother had a degree in zoology. On my mother's side. On my father's side, my grandmother was a doctor. My mother had 5 advanced degrees. My father had a bachelor's degree from Harvard and a PhD from Yale. Almost every single one of my cousins has gone to an Ivy League. Almost all of my aunts and uncles have PhDs or the equivalent thereof. I was surrounded at all times with the expectation that that just happened. It wasn't something that was unachievable or difficult to happen. There's a story about my uncle who recently died because of COVID, and how one day he was hauled down to the headmaster's room and said, by the way, you're going to Harvard. He hadn't even applied. He was just told, you're going to Harvard. So despite the fact that I can't spell at all, somehow the expectation I was going to a good school was there, and it was never to be questioned. It wasn't. Fortunately for me, well, I can't spell at all. At the time when I was applying to school, the SAT was God. It was the thing. And those tests were written for me. I could take those tests and do amazingly well without even really trying. I got into schools, but at the same time, my senior year in college, the vice president of the college I went to said, what the hell are you doing in my university? I graduated with honors, by the way, but I still couldn't spell. I was upset by the fact that I couldn't spell. So my privilege is I have that history. I have all of those people who went before me, who accomplished all that, who set as an example for me the importance of education and what it could do to raise you out of being the boy who walked at the wrong end of a mule while it was heading north, and you were looking at the south end of it, and went to college and achieved great things, and married somebody who came from a family full of education and lawyers and doctors and so forth. So that's where my privilege comes from.
Thank you, Peter. Can I ask a follow-up for you just to expand on? So that's very powerful, because what you're talking about is, cultural capital, the idea of like access,
Exactly.
just getting access to resources, having legacy, relationships, connections, resources,
Or just expectations.
and just expectations,
So
right?
what is the difference between growing up in a family where the only interaction with the world is the television, where there are no books, where there is no intellectual conversation, no reading, and growing up in a family where the conversation is happening between people who have got PhDs and
Mhm,
MDs and law degrees, and
mhm.
they're just talking to the world from that viewpoint.
For sure.
You get associated, connected with a vocabulary that nobody else is likely to have who doesn't come from the same background.
Mhm.
You understand, just because you've stewed in it since you were a young tadpole, the expectations and the attitudes of higher education.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
just happens.
Yeah.
Not because you were particularly deserving,
Mhm.
but it just happens.
It's powerful because what you're naming also is the recognition that you had access to that as an individual, but also understanding how the system is set up to make sure that the system is set up to serve
Mhm.
the particular population that you're describing, right? That it's the resources are there, the legacy is there. And so as you think about that, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how, when you have that awareness, how does that show up, or how does that inform your work as a school board member? When you think about the challenges and the struggles that we know public education is up against right now.
So,
That's a big question, but if I can come back to you too.
so the thing is that, well, we had all that education. My particular branch of the family didn't have a whole lot of money. College professors sometimes didn't get paid terribly well. And with 4 kids, we ate an awful lot of what my mother referred to as mackerel cackerel, which was a casserole made from mackerel and wheat germ, which fortunately I really liked, and everybody else thought was disgusting. Okay. Part of it is, what do you grow up with?
Yeah, yeah.
I worked picking up trash at 118 degrees on hot asphalt
Mhm,
in the summers,
mhm.
helped pay for college.
Yeah.
So I got exposed to what it meant not to be
Mhm. Yeah,
going to law school or getting education.
Yeah.
And I grew up thinking that I was fortunate I didn't grow up in Germany or another country where you're expected to know what your profession is going to be at the age of 12 or 13 or 14.
Mhm,
And you're going into that
mhm.
apprenticeship program or that legal system, because
Mhm.
at those times I would not have been chosen. I was given the luxury of allowing my brain to catch up with the fact that I couldn't write. I was articulate as hell and got to the point where, eventually, by the time I was graduating from college and going to law school, technology could support me
Mhm,
and provide me with the
Mhm.
means of
mhm.
dealing
Right.
with that.
Yeah.
But it also is I've told Coach this, my one sort of nightmare, my disaster scenario is the wealth of this world is based not on gold, not on oil, not even on the sweat equity of those people who have to do everything they can every single day just to get by. The wealth of this world is based on the human mind. And we have so few people with amazingly good minds that we can't afford to waste them, because the problems we're facing are so huge.
Yeah.
Climate change,
Yeah.
poverty, racism,
Mm.
pollution.
Mm.
Our tendency to go out and engage in genocidal wars just for occasional kicks.
Mm.
All of those things are difficult problems to deal with.
Mhm.
And my nightmare is that there is a ghetto or a slum or something like that, where there is a kid who has the potential to solve one of those problems,
Mm, mm,
which may save mankind.
mm.
And because we haven't educated that kid, we're never going to get that way
Mm.
working on our side.
Mm. That's
you
really
need a course
powerful.
for it.
That's very powerful because it reminds me also of, or it doesn't remind me, but it raises for you all as leaders in the school district, crafting policy and really thinking about how do we continue to make sure that we're educating all kids and all kids are getting access, is having that awareness that that child could be right here in this district and what is not available, what resources are not available for that child to access the same kinds of, the opportunity to maybe be that one, right? So I think the idea of the exercise and the conversation is to see how there's all these different elements that we all bring to education in terms of our lived experiences and identities and how that helps us understand and informs the equity lens. So if you really think about what is the equity framework for the school district and for the work of the admin team and all, it trickles down to everyone.
So
So,
I'm used to seeing the kid who doesn't really fit in.
mhm,
I was the kid who didn't fit in because I was 125th in my class in high school. I also read 2.5 books a day in class because I was bored out of my skull.
mhm. So it didn't suit you.
I was a national merit finalist,
Mhm,
but my GPA was just average at best.
mhm,
That kind of
mhm.
mixed signaling to the society
Mhm.
is something we're not very good at dealing with.
Yes.
And I want to make sure that the kids who like me have
Mm,
no real fit. They're the square peg in the round hole.
yeah,
Somehow find a square peg.
Yeah,
to fit
for
into.
sure. Great, appreciate that.
I have to tell you, may I?
Yeah, please.
As you were saying that, I have two grown children. Everyone knows Linda around here because she's a teacher here. Our son lives in the DC area. Dean was one of those kids, and they started telling me that when he was in the 2nd grade. Said he's a dreamer. Says he'll be out there, be looking out the windows, and he's not hearing a word we're saying,
Uh-huh.
but he could ace all the tests. But he had a horrific time in middle school and high school. I mean, I was on first name basis with every person in the administration in Maryland, where he went to high school. But he speaks 5 languages, 5. His job, he works for one of the agencies in DC. Okay. Linda speaks 3 languages. Not that she has to use them or doesn't use them here, but they were given that opportunity. But when you said you were one of those kids, immediately I thought of my son, because all the way through school, in the different schools, of course, we were going around, but still, Linda was high honors in National Honor Society and all of those kinds of things. And Dean just, Linda would come up and they go, "You can't be Dean's sister. You're kidding me."
My sister was valedictorian and she refused to know that we were related.
Yeah. But I think
Yeah.
about that in our school district here. Because of the diversity that we have, not only with racial diversity, gender identities, but the capabilities of some of these kids that I think that we are missing
Mhm,
some of their capabilities.
mhm,
A person like you, a person like Dean. And I think that's one of the things I would like to see our school board work, our school district work
mhm,
more on.
mhm.
I know there's kids out there that
Sure.
that we're missing,
Mhm, mhm.
and I'm not sure how we're going to be able to help them, but I know that it's out there, and I think that's something that we as a school board and the school district really need to work on.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what you're talking about is some of the bias or implicit bias or assumptions that get made
Yes.
about
absolutely.
kids fitting into a particular learning way of learning. So,
Ally's hand is
Oh,
up
good.
on the select board.
Yes, I know. I'm gonna move. Thank you. Hi, Ally.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me tag in on Zoom. And I just am appreciating the conversation, especially around, it's always great to connect with school board folks and to think about what young people might be missed in this equity work that we're doing, and thinking about who's not in the room and who's not included. And so I'm just here reflecting and thinking about that. And I do have my own thoughts to share about this, my own identities that I'm reflecting on in my work in the community and as a member of the select board. I did just want to make an offering and a note about language. I did hear, and it has been a little bit hard for me to hear what's in the room, but I think I heard the term Oriental used earlier, and I did just want to offer that I'm certainly not an expert, but I understand that a language is evolving, especially as we're describing folks of different identity spaces. But I did just want to offer that. I think it's my understanding that while individual Asian and Asian American folks may identify with that term Oriental, that largely that's at this point, I think, considered more of an antiquated and pejorative term to describe Asian folks and Asian American folks. So I just want to offer that in the spirit of courageous conversations, as we're here to do, and just want to offer that reflection. And then in terms of this, for me at individual identities, I sort of had to pick three. I couldn't just pick two because there are three that intersect really strongly for me, which are my race as a white person, my gender as a cisgender woman, and also my age. And was really appreciating hearing from Sydney and Olivia about sort of their experiences with being young. And while I'm not quite as young as they are, I definitely experience sort of that tension of being a young woman, a young white woman in this community. And often that can afford me a lot of privilege, especially in conversations about race, because I feel I've been racialized and I've been socialized in ways that align with a lot of folks in our community, other white folks. And so in my whiteness, I feel that responsibility to be able to have those courageous conversations and be able to say, hey, let's talk about that. Let's unpack that a little bit, to be able to hold that space and to be patient with folks and to have folks also be patient with me as I'm learning too. And then also sort of that tension of being a young woman. I think it's no secret that young women can have a tough time in municipal leadership and face a lot of bias. And so while I feel a lot of pride in being a young woman in this leadership space, it also comes with lots of challenges. It comes with being told that I'm inexperienced, being told that I'm immature. Those are exact words that have been used to describe me. And while at the end of the day, I brush those off because I'm here to do work for our community and hopefully positive work, still doesn't make it easier. So I think, privilege and power is certainly contextual. So there are times in which those identities, I definitely feel like I can connect with younger folks in the community and have that privilege, but then also sometimes there can be that disconnect when assumptions are made based on how people see me and how they view me. So thanks for letting me share that.
Thanks.
Ally, this is Nancy. Thank you for calling me on that. I was one that said it, so thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Ally. Appreciating how you're, again, thinking about impact of your awareness in the role that you play in the select board. And I think it's important that we are having conversations in community together around that, so people can be paying attention to how they might be perpetuating some of that and being able to give attention to it. Thanks. Coach, did you want to chime in?
You're muted, Coach.
Yeah.
No, I was just getting to the button. It's always interesting, for me to have my friends and colleagues and fellow community members, engage in a conversation that I live. And, you know, I was listening to the different stories of growing up and realizing, you know, difference and those feelings of not being part of. And in this work for me, what I try to equate with folks is reminding them about those experiences and then magnify it. Because until any of us, you know, have walked in those other shoes, you know, be it disability shoes or transgendered shoes or older people's shoes, younger people's shoes, you know, whatever they are, we're not necessarily fully understanding, you know, where somebody is. So I'm just really proud that our community has chosen to come together. This work is not easy work. At the beginning of the presentation, you know, Mary was sharing with us, you know, how difficult this is, you know, but the willingness for us to do it transcends all of that, you know, and that's really cool. You know, that's really cool. This is a special place. You notice I didn't say it's a perfect place. I said it's a special place.
Yeah.
Working towards perfection. So, you know, it's all about progress. You know, one of the things that I think, you know, some of you know, I've been in recovery for a long time. And one of the things that I learned in recovery is progress, not perfection. And that's what this is all about, you know, too, you know, this work. You know, I'm so proud of our younger voices, you know, and that's from all of the folks that we've all engaged with over you know, over time, be it, you know, our students, you know, and for me, it's a lot of different students because, you know, it covers decades. Like Tom and I, you know, have these conversations, you know, and we'll talk about, remember that student, you know, from Mascoma that we worked with, and, you know, he or she, and actually one of them, my daughter ran into one of our shared students, and he is just doing so well. You know, my daughter's living in southern New Hampshire, and she ran into him, and he's getting married, and, you know, all of this cool stuff. You know, that's what this is about. That's what this work is about, being able to share that experience, strength, and hope. Okay. And as long as I have energy, you know, I'm not going to give up that, you know, that quest. It's not easy sometimes, you know, because any of us, you know, can get tired, you know, like as we work, you know, like through these things. But I think, you know, we look at some of our other uh, warriors, let's call them, you know, like a John Lewis, you know, who we were fortunate to have him in our lives as long as we did. He almost died at an age, you know, at an age that our high school graduates are at. But yet we had his experience, strength, and hope for years. And that mentoring hopefully will help us, you know, as we move forward, you know, in this work. And it stands as a good reminder, as we continue. So Mary, thanks for guiding us. And it's been really cool to listen to our colleagues as they move through this.
Thanks, Coach. Thank you for that. And I just want to make sure if Kim or Joe wanted to share any thoughts, reactions, comments before we move to closing.
Please. Maybe before 8.
Oh, boy. Do I need to come over there?
Speaking of identities.
Yeah, I find it interesting, and I was thinking about, and I think Coach has had this issue as well. So since I've been in the Upper Valley, I've been asked to be on a lot of boards and be on in a lot of things, and I have a difficult time saying no. And I just, but I started to think, why am I being asked to be on a lot of these things? And then at some point during the early part of my tenure, DEI comes up. And this is incredibly important work, but it's not the work that I always need to lead. And I have numerous times said, I will support, I will lend help, but it's not for me to lead, particularly in a community where I am 1%, 2%, or 3%. I think it is important for me, or people that look like me, to be in the room. So when stupid stuff happens, you can say, that was stupid. And that's okay to be stupid, but it's also okay to say, okay, maybe we need to look at this a different way. And so I think that I've enjoyed this community, and to borrow trying to move forward, and trying to, sometimes in an imperfect way, reach perfection.
We can go, please. I would love to. No, it's okay. I'm going to close us after that. So.
Okay.
No. If we want to hear from you.
I definitely, I definitely, my whiteness, my race is always, it's in the forefront of my mind in a way that it didn't used to be. But I think in what I was relating to in this particular exercise was the personal history and social class, in the sense of similarly, had an upbringing in poverty, and had actually from middle class to poverty, and then have my adult life sort of made it back up to middle class. But fifth kid in a big family, so I always was like fighting to be heard and fighting for what I wanted, and had this sort of like really, I'd say, very privileged and ideal balance of like some adversity to overcome and build resilience, but absence of really significant trauma or abuse, that kind of this real, I think, just healthy balance of not too easy and not too hard, which then basically gave me sort of the confidence to be innovative and experiment and open a business when white representation was like pretty gritty, but I was attracted to that, And then, coming to the municipal government in a way that I felt like that I had also the confidence to feel like I could help voice underserved folks that could basically help me, help guide me to helping improve our community at large. And so I guess I could absolutely go on that, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Kim. And I just want to appreciate the presence of the two of you here tonight, and also because I think part of the work is particularly if we go back to the strategic plan, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that word here, but the equity and diversity strategic plan, I'm just joking, that there is work to do together, like with the municipal government and with the school board. And that's, I think, part of the hope, right, is that these community engagement sessions are bringing together a range of different stakeholders.
I think Ally and Mike are both online. as
Oh, that's
select-
right.
they're
Thank
both
you.
select
A
board
select board.
members.
Okay, good. Sorry, I didn't see.
I don't know if any others. but
Okay.
I think Maybe might have tried, but.
Oh, okay. I know. I can't wait till we can all, if ever, be in the same room.
And Mary,
Yeah.
just so you know, several other select board members did reach out with conflicts tonight.
Okay, great.
So progress.
Yes, for sure.
Can I have a
Yeah,
final thought
please.
too before you
Yes,
totally wrap it
yeah,
up?
yes.
I just
Please.
don't want to lose sight of the question that you asked
Mhm.
about how everyone's background, affects the roles that we
Mhm.
have.
Mhm.
And I think that's so powerful.
Mm, mm.
And I'm just, I'm never satisfied with how much work we've done on this because there's so much to do. But
Mhm.
the fact that we can even ask that question, like, is that a lens we can look through when we're making decisions or
Mhm.
grappling with problems? How does my role, how does my background, my knowledge about the equity work
Mhm.
impact the decision I'm going to be asked to make in about 2
Mhm.
minutes?
Sure,
I
absolutely.
just think that's really powerful.
I think that is part of an
Yeah,
equity
like,
lens.
that's,
Yeah.
like, amazing.
Well, I was thinking when Coach shared your experience, Coach, of talking about not being part of, well, some of us were able to talk about being part of, right? And so the idea of how even if, and you and I have a very similar background, Kim, I grew up in a lot of poverty, a lot of family struggle and challenges, and then, wove my way. But all of that informs how I understand what it means and how I do this work and how I bring myself to this conversation, because I've kind of lived on some various sides of it. I think the challenge is when we are working with, if we were talking about the school board, our faculty, our staff, admin, who have not had this conversation or thought about this, and how, when we don't have the understanding that does in fact inform how we make decisions, how we see kids, how we understand children, all of that. Adverse childhood experiences, how that can also inform how you might see kids. But if you didn't have that, then that's not something that you're looking through. So thank you. I think it is important. And I think it's an ongoing conversation, because what we're talking about is how do we create a culture of belonging in the school district, but also community-wide across the various stakeholder groups that are here. So,
Maybe how do we check each other too, when maybe not considering that equity lens or that background sort of lens, like.
sure.
Because it's you so easily slip back into your past and maybe everybody discuss some of the things that happened as they grew up.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to go back to that because
Yeah.
it's what's most comfortable too. So this leads me to, can you go down a couple of slides to number 12? And I know we need to wrap up here. This is a little bit more of the meat of what I was hoping we would get to, but I always over plan, so, which is fine. But I have some questions.
Is this,
No, you can keep going because,
keep going?
yeah, it's questions to explore. It's number 12. There it is. Great.
What?
So my hope is that in the ongoing conversation, can you go back? Oh, sorry. You have this PowerPoint, so you can share this now. I mean, you can use this.
Yeah.
Is that you could go to some of the questions that I was hoping I had posed to you as we think about what we just talked about and what we were exploring, to make the transition and connection to efforts in the district. And so there's a lot of questions here and we won't get to them now at all. But I think, again, to be going back to the strategic plan, the anti-racism policy, examining like, where's the progress? But I think it's also what we were talking about tonight is what are some of the challenges to this commitment and what gets in the way of that? And so as we identify what some of the challenges are, like when I look at EL 10 and I go through just based on some of my experience working with you and Roy and Maggie, I see a lot of good effort that's happened. And it's also interesting to see where some of the challenges and obstacles are. So what would be some of the supports and resources needed to get at some of those? And then I also think about the second question, which is asking, as we think about the community whom is served by the school district, I always think of whose voice is at the table, whose voice is not at the table, but maybe on the menu. I wish I could say I could claim responsibility for that cute statement, but I can't. But again, like there's oftentimes this idea of inclusion versus really equity. Because inclusion, sometimes the perception is, well, we'll get the folks there. And I say, yes, but are they also in positions of leadership? Are their voices being heard? So that's like a recruitment and retention conversation, Tom, which we have talked about before, which is a huge challenge. And what are the actions to remedy this? What are some ways when we think about creating diverse pools? This is like school districts everywhere are struggling with this. But again, it's an interesting, and I think it can be a fun challenge to really think creatively. And then the last one is school board members, community members, et cetera, continue to build capacity and begin to understand how aspects of dominant culture, which we've talked a lot about tonight. I really appreciate all of you who shared a lot of those elements of your own lived experience. How those aspects of dominant culture keeps those other perspectives and people and history out of the picture. It's not because we're intentionally doing that, but it's because of the system and the way the system is set up. So we have to be so thoughtful about how we really think about this and talk about it. So I just want to appreciate you all. I always am happy to come and work with you all. And I'm grateful tonight, particularly because I needed to be part of this conversation so I can lift myself up, because I have 2 more nights of very challenging school board. This was not challenging, but I have 2 coming up that are challenging. And it's been hard. I will admit, I've been struggling because of what's happening across the country. So thank you for having me and for engaging.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great.
Mary, great job. Thank you so much for what you bring.
You're all welcome. You're all part of it too.
For what you bring to this work. As I've said, I'm really proud of our district. I'm proud of our town. We have work to do, and we have to be willing to do it. And we have to be intentional about it. And you notice I am being very emphatic. And I will continue to be, because it's that important. We don't want any child to have to endure what all of us just talked about, especially if we can affect those encounters. So I'm just proud of this group. I'm really proud of our student reps. They are what keep us going. They're a product of this community, and we should all be proud of them. So I guess at this point we'll move into the rest of our agenda, and we've got
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, those in the audience too. This,
And Joe and Ally and Mike and Kim, remember, the door is always open. And we need you. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna move into our the governance process section. So the naming.
Yeah. We do have the principal here, who, can we make Amelia Donahue panelist? She's gonna speak a little to the OQS patio. Oops. Hi, Amelia.
Hi,
I'm
everybody.
glad you're here. Thank you so much for hanging in there. We're a little later than I told you, but just quickly before Amelia talks about Leo and the OQS project, the school board several years ago, after several requests to name various facilities and parts of facilities or rooms in facilities, developed a naming policy. And this was actually, I think, the first time they actually implemented it. So when Amelia brought the request to me, I gathered the naming policy team, who was the director of buildings and grounds, Jonathan Garthwaite, and myself and Tristan Upson, the principal of the middle school, to review the application, if you will, for naming of a school facility. And this didn't perfectly fit because the policies really revolves around staff and adults, but I did think it was a good time to implement a policy for a student, because they do want to name a section of the campus after Leo. So with that said, I'll let Amelia talk a little bit about Leo and why she and the OQS community feel so this is so important. Thanks for being here.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
It's perfect.
Great. Well, I was really excited to bring this project forward because there is quite a crew of people at our school who have been, I think, in search for the right way to remember Leo at our school in a permanent way. Leo was in 4th grade last year when he passed away at home. And he was a really, really special kid. I don't know how many of you got to read the letters in the packet. But when he died, I think it was, to my knowledge, the first time Ottaquechee School has ever lost a student who was currently attending the school. So it was a pretty monumental event for our community. The ironic thing is we went into last year, right, so worried about health and safety and COVID. And then we wound up having to say goodbye to Leo for reasons totally unrelated to COVID. But it was this moment that the school really came together, and the staff for sure, but more so the students, had such beautiful and really profound meaning that they attached to Leo and to his life and the ways that he had impacted him. He was a student that faced a lot of challenges, and a lot of things came hard to him that come very easy to a lot of students. And yet he was this little sunbeam in the school. His favorite color was yellow. And he was kind of known by all his peers for giving fist bumps and high fives and saying hello. And he had all these funny words for things. Stacy McDougall was his teacher in his last year, and he called her Mrs. Google, which is great because it rhymes with her name, but she's also a technology whiz. So it was just perfect in many ways. And he was attacking multiplication and multi-digit addition and subtraction with all this just hunger to learn, even things that were really challenging for him. And so I could go on for days, but I think hopefully you got the chance to read from other people's point of view as well. I think it's really important to remember as a community those people that really inspire us, especially kids. And so what has been proposed is, I think, really fitting both to our school and to Leo. It's a patio next to the garden. And so it would have easy access for classes to be able to get outside and have a place to gather as a class that's just a little bit more special. And our amazing garden volunteer, Paul Sadowski, suggested planting yellow flowers that will bloom all throughout the year, all around the patio. And then the special education department would like to just provide a small plaque that notes that it's in Leo's honor. So that's kind of the basic idea. Hopefully, Tom, did people get to see the drawings and the
Yeah.
sketches?
Yep,
Okay,
they have it in their hard copy and I sent it to them over the weekend. The public can view it too in the Google bio on the website.
great.
And the letters were very touching from the kids. And
So-
from Miss Past, who worked with him since he was 3.
Yeah.
Miss Amelia, I rarely, amend things that come from, our school community. But thinking of yellow, ask Paul if he would consider putting a forsythia in there. When you were talking, I thought of that bush, because that's like the yellowest thing. You can drive down the street and all of a sudden see a forsythia and go, whoa, and I would imagine that he would have too. So anyways, that was just a thought. Sorry to
That's a great
interject.
idea.
Yeah,
It's often the first one too in the spring.
it
so-
is. It blooms so early in the spring. It'd be the first thing that sort of comes to life and shows some color.
Just a thought.
And they grow well around here.
So Tom, our next steps,
So, I mean,
comments
comments,
from the rest of the board.
Yeah, I do have a question. Has the young man's family been consulted on how they feel about this project?
I'm gonna let Amelia.
Yes, I talked with Leo's mom, Anna, on the phone about the project. And actually, last year when Leo passed, the family received a lot of donations and wanted to do something right away. And we looked into for a long time how to build a bus, like a play structure. And for various reasons, that project just wasn't the right fit. And so when this patio idea came up this year, I reached out and they are really excited to have him remembered. I think in any way that feels really appropriate to him. And Anna said that this felt like a really nice way to remember him at school.
I do, when looking at the drawings, the only other thing I say is, I find it interesting we're putting a fire pit in a patio in an elementary school. And I'm not, that makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm not saying it's a deal breaker, but it's just something that I feel needs to be at least thought of.
Yeah, we would definitely have to run that by the fire marshal and see what he thinks, but we have been allowed to have a fire permit and you have fire during forest kindergarten. So I'm assuming we also have a pizza oven where we use fire to cook pizza at both the high school and Artaquiche. So I'm assuming if it's the right sort of structure, I don't know if you've run that by Tom yet, Peltier, or not, but we
I
will
have not, but I would be happy to. And I think our concept was also to get one that's portable that could be stored in the locked shed so that it's not out there all the time. But that in the case of, forest kindergarten or other celebrations or community events, that we could use it.
Yeah, we
But
would have run anything by him before we could go forward with that piece.
And he's been really great about coming out and checking out any project ideas we have and letting us know what we would need to do to make it feasible.
Cool. Other board members?
Coach?
Yes.
So I'm a little unclear. This is being brought forward as a naming decision, but I'm not entirely sure that the space and structures and so forth that are to be named have been approved yet or funded or what. So has this been funded? Is this a decision to both fund it and name it? What exactly are we being asked?
I think it's already funded by the school and by the contributions to the family. It was just to name something on school property that we were really asking.
Yep.
Because it's, you know, we hope it's a permanent.
So it is a structure which is in the process of being funded and built.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done anything because we want your approval, but this is where we'd like to start
Okay.
constructing it and make sure the space is dedicated to this student and it's appropriate in the eyes of the board, and we follow the rules. You know, we've adapted the policy because it's not entirely applicable, but
Okay.
it was the closest thing we had to some guidance on being
Right.
permanent.
So for purposes of discussion, I would be okay with us saying that we approve the naming of something after Leo based on the advice of the naming committee, assuming that is what they've advised us according to the policy. But I wouldn't want to approve the structure, the space and so forth until we've had, if that is our job, I'm not sure if that is, it may be a entirely administrative function rather than school board function. But until we have more detail on what the actual structure is. So if that is to come to us, and it's not just we have all of the review process in place, the permitting process in place and so forth, and we just want to name. If it's just the name, then I'm fine with going forward with that. If it's more, I don't want to conflate the two issues. Does that make sense to the rest of you?
Yes, it does. And I do have one more follow-up question. I think we also
Yes.
need to consult with our insurance carrier. Regardless of how, if it's portable or whatever, just because it is can be potentially an open flame.
Olivia?
Mhm.
I don't remember, but I know they used to do a lot of things outside in the winter and so forth. Did they have a fire during that, or was it?
A lot of times, like, yeah, there'd be fires or things like that. There were like various fire pits. I remember being on OQS and like we've done fires with like the high school too and stuff like that.
So it's not entirely new.
Okay.
Yeah, so like the idea of like having fire somewhere isn't new.
Yes, we've definitely done it many times, and all those questions I'm happy to satisfy the board, but those are really, to me, part of my role. Like I have to make sure that there's insurance and that we're covered.
Right.
I have to make sure the fire marshal is okay with any pizza oven, any open flame, fire, anything like that they approve and are a part of. This was really the concept of,
Okay.
will the board allow us to build a patio and name it after a student in a permanent way? We're naming a part of a school property on behalf of a student who's passed away. And everything else will be absolutely run by the authorities that have jurisdiction, whether it's the fire marshal. We can't do anything without the fire marshal's approval.
Right.
It's not even a question in my mind.
Right. All of those are, let's say, in the realm of, the administrative function, as Peter mentioned. This being, let's say, our first delve, into, a naming. Of course, there's going to be adaptations because, none of these, some policies are very, succinct and accurate and clear, and there's no question. We kind of came into this one knowing that it was going to evolve. So I'm just really glad that we've got to this point and we have an opportunity to put it into practice. And all of your points are well taken. And I think that we can complete this evening's work, with a reasonably crafted motion, directing the superintendent to ensure that all of the district's responsibilities are met. And, if that's our, if that's the direction we choose to go.
Coach,
People's thoughts?
I believe Olivia had a question, Coach.
Sure, Olivia.
I had like more of a clarifying question about this policy. Is there like a running list that we keep of all of the various structures or things like that that have been named after someone in our school district?
That's a great question. We have recently thought about taking that project on. Everything other than the bench dedicated to Laurie Dickerson was named before I came.
Right.
That's part of the reason why I was really wanted the naming policy, because a lot of things had sort of been forgotten or lost in the longevity, the campus, various sections of buildings, and it's unfortunate because I think there should be an official. These are the pieces of our property, the school board's property, that are dedicated to someone sort of forever.
What about the Luna door at the high school? Was
Yeah,
that?
the Luna door was one that sort of slipped in before
Okay.
we had a naming policy. Very unofficial. It's never been through any procedure or process,
Okay.
even by myself. It was done through
I remember
the
that
athletic
being just like,
department at the
bam.
high school. So that was another catalyst for sort of, we need an official
Right.
way to do it.
Exactly.
And I will,
There's trees and there's rocks and there's memorials and there's things named after people that no one has any recollection at this point, who or when or why or.
and I will admit fully that when drafting this policy with the help of Tom and the team, we were really thinking about existing structures being named, not contemplated structures being created to be named. So there was a bit of a sort of blind spot perhaps that we didn't really consider. So anybody else have any comments, thoughts?
I think I'll leverage what you said, Peter. I mean, tonight we can go forth and if we're okay with the concept
Right.
of setting up a memorial.
Yeah.
And then as Coach said, having Tom do what his responsibilities are and coming back with the final, because I think that's the way we handled Laurie's basically.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think that would be appropriate for tonight. And I think I understand where Tom is coming from, but I think tonight flushed out some of the questions that might have come up later on type thing. I understand he's a competent and would have thought of these things, but still just try to streamline the process.
Mhm.
So I would be comfortable going forth with the concept.
Right. So, Olivia?
Um,
Sorry, Coach, I don't need to interrupt your job as chair, just I don't think you can see.
Hi, Coach.
No, I saw you.
Okay.
Okay. So the policy says that once the application has been submitted, the district can make a naming committee.
Yeah.
Is the purpose of like this to vote on whether or not you're going to make the naming committee, or to go one step further and whether or not?
So the idea was that if a name was brought forward, and that we didn't want to have a standing naming committee because it was expected that there would be long periods of time before somebody came forward with a proposal. that the superintendent would establish the naming committee, select the members, put it together. That committee would then review the proposal to make the name appropriately affixed to whatever part of the property we're talking about, and would come then to this board with a recommendation, being either that they recommended that we approve the name, that they recommended against it, or that they recommended that we follow up with further questions and so forth. So it was really intended that the board would be the last stop in the process, where there would be a intermediate internal to the administrative function board that would come forward with this proposal, which is why I'd asked if the naming thing had been in fact reviewed by the board, the naming committee group.
Yeah, I think that's part of where I've been remiss, is that I did not take the names of the three individuals
Okay.
to the board for approval.
I mean, as Peter described it, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So maybe we should modify the policy to take out the approval of the three members of the naming
Right,
committee.
right.
Seems a little.
Because I mean, ultimately, we have the responsibility to decide if it's worthy. I mean, and I have faith that Tom would at least come forth and saying, here's what we're considering,
Right.
before they spend a lot of time.
So the idea was that naming committee would do the research, would gather the
Yeah.
information,
Right.
and do it, because it was expected that there could be some ideas that were quite wonderful and marvelous, and there'd be some ideas that we just say, no, we're not really interested in doing that. And to get as much as the legwork done before it got to us was the intention of why that committee would exist.
Exactly. So I think by removing item 3 in this policy, that intention comes through, because I mean.
Okay.
Right. So we don't
So-
need to have this.
So folks,
Focusing on.
let's think about process for just a sec. We have two things that we will address this evening. You know, one is an amendment to the policy. And then the other is this activity. So what I'd like to suggest, because I think we're at that point, if we could get two motions, the first motion so that Tom and Amelia and the rest of the team that's working on this project can continue to move forward, is that motion. And then after we get that one done and hopefully passed, we will request a motion to amend the policy, you know, as we're starting the sense we need to do. And then that way, the process of first and second reading would be completed, because we could use this as the first reading of the change of the policy, and it would come back, and at the next meeting, we would finalize, and then it's done. If that makes sense to folks.
So am I understanding correctly that you would like the sentence for number 3 to read? The makeup of this committee is to be 3 individuals who will be nominated by the superintendent, period.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I
And
heard.
we will remove and approve by the board of directors from that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then I think it ought to be not be nominated, but selected by.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's more appropriate wording. I agree, Peter.
And that would be in the amendment language.
Okay.
So let's get Amelia home, because I think she might be, but you know, she's got a couple hundred little people, you know, that she, and a few adults that she has to deal with tomorrow. So trying to be conscious of that. If we could address that motion first, then we'll come back to the amendment of the language, because I think we have that pretty, pretty well started.
Do you want to try, Peter?
Okay, so I move that the naming of school district facilities policy, by the way, we don't have an ID for it, but that's aside, be amended so that.
No. We're not going to deal with that one first.
Sorry, Peter.
Okay.
I was hoping you could wordsmith the vote on whether.
Okay, I'm sorry, I
Concept.
misunderstood.
Yeah.
Let's address the question from
Right.
Amelia and Tom first, and then
All right, so let me see if I can get this. I move that we approve in concept the naming of a structure after Leo, and that the details of the structure, its financing, maintenance, and so forth will be resolved before final approval is given.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion and a second to give the superintendent and his administrative team the authority to move this project forward and bringing back the final details to the board. That being said, is there any we have a motion and a second, so is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Thank you very much, Amelia. This, needless to say, this was our first. You brought us to the first, so.
Well, thank you all so very much. The whole team's going to be really excited. So I'll work with Tom on the details so we can satisfy your motion, but I really appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you, Amelia.
And did this policy ever actually get approved, or was it just drafted? Because the copy you have here does
Yeah, I
not
see
have
the
approval
question.
date, does not have a
I
policy.
believe it was.
It was approved because I remember
Yeah.
I added
Yes.
the discussion about the removal.
Okay, so it's
Right.
just a matter
I
of the
remember
form
that
itself,
too.
not.
Yeah,
So I gotta look up that date. I did know.
yeah, because that was around the time they started the discussion about the Confederate war heroes. type of
Oh,
thing.
yeah, the statuary.
Right.
Yeah,
And I do remember you asking about what if you named a structure after someone who was discredited somehow,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
something was
And
found out that was.
And we went back, I remember. The draft.
Yep.
Which
Okay,
is a
good.
great point.
So then secondly, I would like to move that the naming of the school district facilities policy be amended so that item number 3 will be revised to read as follows. The makeup of this committee is to be of 3 individuals who will be selected by the superintendent, period.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion and a second to amend our naming policy. And this is the first reading of that change. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved. Cool. Thank you all. That's,
Yeah, thank you.
that's the cool part about this. We get a chance to, kind of reset when we need to.
I really
brings-
appreciate you moving that forward because, the kids and staff really want to get that done before
Yeah.
school out. So
Right.
it's perfect.
So the next piece is the Vermont Continuous Improvement Plan approval. Tom?
Yes. This document is something that we work on constantly with the administrators in the district, and it forms the foundation of all of our federal grants. So it's the sort of the lens and the buckets that we have to fit our expenditures and the grants into to make it structured, make it consistent, keep them aligned, so we're not all over the place spending money on anything and everything. So really what we work on is those three goals around safe and healthy schools, academic achievement, and emotional regulation, and that whole equity lens that you see in the grant, in the school action plans, you know, when they're reported, you heard it over and over and over.
Yes.
But annually, we have to have it documented in the board meeting minutes that you saw it, you reviewed it, you approved it. It's nothing new, nothing that you haven't heard many times, and all throughout the action plan reports from the principals. So I'm asking your approval tonight. And certainly, if you have questions or concerns, we can bring it back next time when Kathy and Roy are present, so they can work, you know, answer any detailed questions, because this is
So-
really their purview.
So I think based on conversations with fellow board members, I think this is my perception, and you guys can tell me if I'm off base or not. I think we should be able to approve the plan. In order to be transparent to our community and the owners, one of the conversations that we had spoke to a recommendation that might come from the finance committee, and it is just a question of transparency for not just the board, but for the community at large. But not to take the time now, because the finance committee is working on drafting a request that it will present to the board and to you as the administrator.
Yeah, okay, and I agree with what Coach said. I understand this needs to get approved, but I do think the process needs to change. I think for one, because they're talking about like a 20% reduction. I think at some point, and I don't know where it fits into our governance style, there should be a report back, say, using actual numbers, saying we're at 40% now, we want to be at 60%, and we made it. Because this gets to the question that Mr. Arnold asked about, what are we getting for our money?
Exactly.
So we need to be more quantitative and say, and I mean, if we make it, great. If we don't, I'm sure everyone tried their hardest, and we can't control a lot of these things. But I think getting back to that transparency, I think that is really, and I guess the other thing that we should talk about is, yes, it's Tom, Kathy, Roy's, all the board, all the administration's responsibility to make the recommendations. But I do think before we need to give the overall approval, because we're the ones who have to justify the results. And this is going to be a common theme of mine. But for tonight, understanding that this needs to get done, I'm all for moving it forward. I'm just saying, next time round, the process needs to change.
So in order to help,
I'm not sure.
Tom, in order to help as we formulate this, and please, Roy and Tom, since you're both here, just make a notation in our calendar notes. And they're going to be in the minutes anyways, because Sherry does an incredible job with our minutes. That detail that Russ brought up will be further formulated by the finance committee, and that would be, Russ, myself, Jacob, you, and the rest of the finance office, and we would be bringing that process and report back to the board so that, they'll see the outcome of the point that Russ just made. Is that clear? Is that clear for everybody?
We can hold on this till the next meeting if you want.
No.
I don't want you to feel uncomfortable.
No, Tom, what we're talking about, is a little, it's different. So it isn't, there's a clear trust factor on our side, which is full trust. The question becomes, we're talking about a kind of a different delivery process, like we did when we were doing the plan delivery. That's evolved and changed, over the past, few years. So this is just an adaptation.
No, I get that. I just don't want you to be uncomfortable approving it based on ways we've done it in the past. I understand the question. I think it's a valid point that 20% of what?
Yeah. So
I think for the community and for everyone, you need to know what's the baseline.
Yeah. So I think that, we can move forward, because God forbid, another, thing get, in the way of moving things. And we'll be able to tell, if the board feels in agreement that we can approve tonight, knowing full well that we have those questions to help formulate, a better process for us, then so be it.
And
Thoughts?
I'll just add, I have confidence in the way this was presented, and I don't want anyone to feel otherwise.
Exactly.
It's just going to be a common theme that I think we need to do a better job of quantitatively reporting where we can. And also, it's been a common theme is when I bring these comments up, it's for the future, because Tom is absolutely right. This is the way it's been done, so it's not fair to change it midstream.
Exactly. And the thing is, that's what we should be doing. This is a 30,000 foot view, of it. We're not, like saying, X. So, other board members, thoughts, please?
Well, I'm in agreement. I am in agreement.
I have no problem with approving it as it presented to us now, and for asking for the procedural improvements which Russ North has suggested. They both make sense. In the same spirit of gathering data and actually quantifying it, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time, so Coach, slap me down if it's appropriate to do so, or tell me when to bring it up next. But in preparing for the diversity, equity, and inclusion training, which we had earlier today, I went and reread the strategic plan document as you had suggested. And I noticed that there were a number of suggestions in that document. And my memory may be faulty, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that we had actually, when that document was first proposed and submitted, we had put together the school's response to it. I would very much like us to dig out the school's response to it, what we had promised to accomplish and by what schedules, and have an accounting of where we are in reaching the goals on the timetables we had established for that document.
Well,
Similarly, given the
Go
same
ahead.
timing, I would love to see that done for the climate action document we had done jointly with the town as well. So I don't know if this is the appropriate time to bring that up or not, but either now or at a future meeting, I would like to have a discussion on that.
Yeah, we can have a
So
further
I
discussion.
go ahead, Russ.
You're
please.
more eloquent in what I said about a report on EL 10.
Well, see, that's what, yeah,
Yeah.
because see, that's it was very intentional and strategic about having the plan as part of the document that we sent out. And I was hoping that it would just stir discussion, and I guess it did.
Success.
So that being said, and that's cool. You know, we should be self-assessing. You know, that's important because, you know, you don't know where you're going unless you look at where you've been, you know, so.
It's actually one of the items that I asked Mary Gannon to start thinking about is how we might go about that, or how she might help us do sort of an assessment of where we're at this stage, given the strategic plan.
Well, that,
Calibration, alignment, whatever you want to call it, but it'd be interesting to say, okay, where are we at now? What do we need to go?
So in order to move the discussion, I think that it sounds to me like we're on the same page. And you are going to be reporting EL 10. And I think you've been getting a lot of feedback even this evening, you know, about, you know, where, you know, what that might attempt to achieve, you know, at the end of the game. And so all of those pieces are part of that, you know, that entity. And that's part of, you know, what you're charged with is, you know, representing that report, you know, of our progress, you know, around EL 10, and these are just components within EL 10, you know, so I think we're on a good path. That's my observation anyways.
With that, I would like to move that we approve the Vermont Continuous Improvement Plan that was presented to us in our document stack this time.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve our improvement plan. And you know what I like, even in the name, you know, Vermont Continuous Improvement Plan. You know, it's a continuous process, you know, and we'll keep trying to make ours the best we can make it, you know. And thank you, Russ, you know, for, you know, your thoughts, and Peter and Nancy, and let's just keep moving. Thank you. Are there any other comments, and we'll move the vote? Okay, I guess we'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved. So the consent agenda, appointments, resignations, and retirements, meeting minutes, and the monitoring reports.
Okay, appointments, I just have a couple tonight. Sarah Morlock, a new teacher at OQS, half-time in STEAM. Leah Asaf, a new classroom teacher at Dothenbrook School, and Leah Loretz in science at the middle school. So those are the only three for tonight.
Cool.
I have one proposed change to make to the minutes. Under the section on board committee reports and updates. With respect to the policy committee, the final sentence in that section is the librarians are reviewing the draft. This is to talk about the proposed policy on removing items from the library collection. At that time, the librarians had reviewed the draft, and the policy committee needed to incorporate their changes into the final version to be decided. So the only change is the librarians have reviewed the draft instead of are reviewing the draft.
Cool. Any other points that folks picked up? Olivia, Russ, Nancy?
I'd like to move that we approve the consent agenda. And as usual, our thanks to those departing and our welcoming to those who are joining us.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. If there's no further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved. So meeting evaluation and
Is there a need for an executive session?
Well, the question there was the board, I'm not sure if everyone received it, but certainly Coach and I, the demand to bargain. Which is, yeah.
Yeah, we all did.
Yeah.
I think we just need to either discuss or, there's two options. I think that came from the discussion around the vaccination mandate.
Mhm.
The last MOU around COVID protocols, the vaccination mandate was included in the MOU with the teachers union, which basically covered, did cover the entire district. This time we discussed it outside of an MOU. So that's what prompted, I think, the demand to negotiate is whether we're going to continue that process of trying to incorporate it into an MOU, or the board was actually going to have a standalone vaccination policy. So that's the conundrum, if you will.
My impression was that we were not having a standalone policy. We were merely advising whether or not we wanted to stress that in the upcoming agenda. I mean, in negotiations.
Well, unfortunately, the negotiations that are coming up are in the fall, and they won't be implemented
Right.
until 23-24
Right.
school year. So for the
So it
fall,
would
there's
need
no
to be, yeah.
vaccination. The MOU expires at the end of this school year.
See, that's
MOU that includes the vaccination mandate.
so what we would be negotiating, Peter, is a new MOU.
Right.
The last two I've worked on with the lead or chief negotiator, Doug Anton from the teachers union. So I don't know if the board wants me to pursue that again or have a sort of a mini negotiation around the MOU
So I think
itself.
this probably does need to be an executive session to have that conversation.
Right.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
the only issue is, unfortunately, I have a rather tired member of the student representative board who had a long trip this morning for German class and has to get to school tomorrow. Is it possible to delay that discussion for another less?
We can, being that we create our own agendas as the board. I would suggest that we, being that I'm on the negotiating committee, I'm going to make a suggestion that Tom and I formulate at least an initial discussion prepping for the executive session at our next meeting. So that, we can, have a jumping off point, copies of the existing MOU, any current discussions, what the climate is and all of that. So that we're,
Sounds like a great idea to me. It's always easier to work from a straw man, just to give you something to react to.
if that's okay with the rest of the board.
Fine with me.
It's okay with me because I think there's more there than meets the eye.
Well, that's why having at least a, some.
Yes, I agree, Coach, but yeah.
Because I
remember that meeting's June 8th at the Wilder School, so it is gonna be sort of a long one because we've got the tour and some presentation before, and then the board meeting.
But I mean, depending upon what we need to talk about, we can
Right.
limit the rest of the board meeting.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think there's a lot of significant items for the actual board meeting. other
No,
than-
we can regulate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for jumping out of order to a.
No,
Have a
that's it.
conversation.
It was perfect though, because that's what I needed. I didn't know what the guidance the
Right.
board wanted with.
All right.
So, but it was important that we got that one squared away. So, meeting evaluation.
I will do it because out of respect for Olivia, because I can read quickly.
Thank you so much.
At the end of each board meeting, each board member and the superintendent or appointed evaluator for the meeting completes this form. The responses are shared and the discussion is held on areas that need improvement. The chair collects the completed forms to use in the board's monitoring process. Board was prepared for the meeting, satisfactory. Board's time was spent on ends, not means, satisfactory. Each board member was given the opportunity to participate, satisfactory. Board treated all persons with courtesy and fairness, satisfactory. Board adhered to Robert's rules as order as appropriate and necessary, satisfactory. Board adhered to its adopted governance style. It emphasized outward vision. It encouraged diversity in viewpoints. It exercised strategic leadership and not administrative detail. It maintained distinction between board and staff roles. It used collective decision-making. It looked to the future. Satisfactory.
I think we got a new person to do options for us.
Yeah.
He was working on that. That's remember when we were talking about in our training those side interests. So now we know what one of his is.
All right, I'd like to move that we adjourn.
Second.
Great meeting, guys.
Speed readers.
Oh, thank you.
Roy, get well, buddy.
Thanks. Have a great night.
You as well. Take care, Tom.